that don't fit in with the rest of society.
Don't want to forget that. Tonight on Bread Theory, we are going to get back into permaculture. So it's been a couple weeks since we've done a show exclusively about permaculture. Last week we did talk a little bit about earthships, which was pretty cool. But tonight we're going to get into more permaculture techniques, specifically Chinampas, which is a method of building kind of aquatic gardens. Basically, you take posts and you make a perimeter, and then you fill that area with a mixture of mud and reeds and basically anything you can find to fill his soil. And then you have a new garden that's once it's up above the surface of whatever water body you're putting it on. And then that maximizes the edge. So there's as an apropos song to start out the stream with. That was a Formidable Vegetable Sound System, Charlie McGee, who does that, and that was his track on his first album that went through the permaculture principles, and that principle was maximize edge and value the marginal, and we're going to be talking a lot about that tonight. So it's a fairly long documentary that we're going to get into, a little over an hour, and it's all about Chinampas. For those of you who are maybe just, oh, hello, Natalie. Good to see you tonight. For those of you who are maybe just listening in the background, if you don't speak Spanish, this may be a difficult one for you to keep up with because it is in Spanish. It's not dubbed, but it is subtitled. So if you can follow along with the subtitles, you should be okay. But if you're, just a little bit of a heads up to you if you're trying to listen along. It is all in Spanish, all of the dialogue of this particular documentary, because we are going to some of the original places where Chinampas were created on, I believe it's the Lake of Tenochtitlan, or maybe that was the name of the city. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, it was the heart of the Aztec Empire. Where they were really big, and we're just gonna dive right into it in just a second here. And as always, I always welcome your questions. This can be some stuff that's maybe difficult to get your head around, especially if you haven't seen some of the previous videos on permaculture. That is always in the archive, so you can always go to the link tree on that. I don't know if I have one set up for the link tree. Yes, I do. So there you go. All you have to do is go to my link tree there, and you can find my whole archive. Almost every permaculture video I've done. I have some editing to do on some of the previous ones, but I'll get caught up eventually. But you can find at least the first, I think, 5 or 6 episodes, as well as the last 1 or 2 on permaculture, there by going to my link tree and following it over to the YouTube, where I keep all my archives of the things that I do. So you have that there. And I just also wanted to mention right off the bat that I do have a Discord now. It's called The Bakery, and you can join. So, if you have any suggestions, because I don't allow links in chat, that's a good place to put your link if you want me to see something that you think is pertinent to whatever we're talking about. And it's a good place if you want to keep the conversation going after the stream ends. That's definitely the place to do it. There's also a space to promote your own work if you happen to be a creator of any sort of variety. So go check out that Discord there. I'm going to take that off now so we can have the nameplates instead. I finally figured out what was wrong last time with why I couldn't get the nameplates to show up with the video feeds. And that's apparently because you can only either have the shout outs to whatever it is you want to look at, like that, or you can have the people's names show up. I don't know why it's one or the other. That's just one of the weird quirks of using Restream. So I'm going to keep that off for now so you can know who you're talking to, especially if you're new to the channel. But let's get to the video. It looks like it's still loading somehow. I don't know why it's still loading. It doesn't want to rewind for some reason. There we go. All right. Switch it over in just a second here. And we'll be able to take a look at Chinampas. Oh, is that not full screen either? Let's make it full screen so you can see it. And it has its own captions along with it, so we won't have to rely on YouTube this time, thankfully. So hopefully it's a little more accurate as well, is what I'm getting at. But yeah, let's get into Chinampas.
Vamos a encontrar algunas chinampas ecoturísticas, pero la mayoría son chinampas productivas, es decir, producen alimento.
Oh no.
Eso es lo que vamos a encontrar.
I'm noticing too that my nameplate somehow is over the video. Ooh, that's excuse me, over the part of the video that's showing those captioning. That's quite annoying. I think I'm going to have to keep something up then. What am I going to put up? We'll just do the link tree. Yeah, we'll just have to keep my link tree up so you'll be able to see the closed captioning. I'll start it over. So I don't want to miss any of the what's said. Here we go.
Vamos a encontrar algunas chinampas ecoturísticas, pero la mayoría son chinampas productivas, es decir, producen alimento. Eso es lo que vamos a encontrar aquí. Es totalmente distinto. Es lo único que queda ya como suelo de conservación de Xochimilco. Se supone que Xochimilco abastece a la Ciudad de México en cuanto a productos se refiere. Ha tenido muchos cambios durante el paso del tiempo, pero se creó para alimentar a la Ciudad de México, porque las islas son artificiales, fueron hechas por las culturas toltecas, pero los aztecas promovieron la distribución de los productos en toda la ciudad. Inclusive ellos crearon el primer mercado, que es el mercado de Tlatelolco, y más de 30,000 personas de todo el país año con año venían a cambiar productos. Entonces,
so let's just pause there for a second. So this first market that was created by having such an abundance of food that was generated by these Chinampas supplied enough to have over 30,000 people coming to the market every year. That's a good sized market. So these are not just kind of hobbyists. You may get, it's not just like your community garden where you may get a small plot and a little bit of produce out of it. These are really for, vast amounts of food production. And one of the cool things about them, of course, is that because you can put them out into any body of water, you're taking what is not even land, really, what is an aquatic terrain, and you're turning it into more arable land. And if any of you are familiar with aquaponics, which uses fish waste to fertilize crops, the same sort of principle is happening here. All the waste from the various organisms that live in the lake are going to contribute fertilizer to these beds, so it's just automatically being fertilized as it's drawing in water and kind of wicking it up through the bed. It's at the same time fertilizing. So these are really powerful ways of generating a lot of food. Now, unless you have your own private lake, this may not be something that you can just do on your own. But there's no reason that cities couldn't get together, or even small communities couldn't get together and take, bodies of water, not so much rivers, but more like lakes, and turn a portion of them at least into productive agriculture that would be really sustainable and produce a lot of edge effect for everything. And as you remember, or as you may remember, one of the benefits of valuing the edge and the marginal is that you have the greatest biodiversity at the edges. Say, for example, at the edge of a forest, you're going to have creatures that spend most of their time in the forest, and you're going to have creatures that spend most of their time in the field or whatever it is that adjoins the forest. So at that forest edge, there's the greatest amount of biodiversity. The same would be true in this sort of a system. You'd have aquatic creatures right up next to terrestrial creatures. You have more space for amphibious creatures as well. This would be a great place for like frogs or toads to hang out, who could also help with pest control as well. Yeah. Oh, so and I apologize. I don't actually know how to. I've only read your name, Renske or Renske. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. I'm doing my best with my my English or my American English accent. If you have anything that you want to share, you can go to the Twitch stream, and you can go ahead and share it there, or you can share it in the Discord, or you can just message it to me. That's fine too. Yeah, I was gonna have a guest on, and they still may come on. I don't know. They're having some technical difficulties with their audio and visual equipment, so they may be on later on. But yeah, they were just chatting with me in a private chat there. So yeah, it sounds like your city, Leiden, they have a tiny floating garden. They have tiny floating gardens in the channels. That's really cool. Yeah, if you could definitely send me a link to that, I'll put it up there, and we'll take a short little diversion and check that out as well. But yeah, let's continue on.
Entonces, esta zona siempre ha sido muy productiva y se establecieron aquí porque el canal es bajito, entonces no es tan profundo y pueden crear producción, ¿no?
Okay, looks like you got that link there coming up. We'll take a look at that. Copy the address. So let's see, where can I put it? We'll take a look at that link. Oh, very cool. Yeah, let's put that up. Take 1 second here. I know we've just barely gotten into the video, but we'll take a look at what Renske has shared with us. Nope, that's not the one I want. Nope. Why do I keep doing that? Where am I? There we go. Okay. 1 second, and we'll be right back. So these are the gardens that you have floating in the canals of your town. That's really cool. Look at that. So right up there. Yeah, and why not? It's the same sort of principle. Don't have to worry about watering. If you have other aquatic life around, you don't really have to worry too much about pest control because it'll kind of keep itself in check. Between the fishes eating mosquitoes and the frogs eating flying insects and all sorts of things. That's really cool. So yeah, so perhaps this could be applied to more canals as long as they're not real fast moving. Sure, why not? That's really cool though. Thank you very much for sharing that. We'll get back to the video.
Del 30% del agua pluvial de una temporada de lluvias en la Ciudad de México, solo el 10% de esa agua la absorbe Xochimilco. Entonces, si esto se urbaniza, la Ciudad de México se va a colapsar por completo. Por eso es la importancia de regresar a los productores a las tierras.
Okay, so when they said that Mexico City would collapse, I thought they were referring to Mexico City in terms of what it used to be when the Aztecs colonized it, or when the Aztecs had control over it. But they're talking about present-day Mexico City depends a lot on these Chinampas still for the food that they eat. So that's pretty amazing, you know, that this sort of ancient technology really has some important and productive applications to even modern-day industrialized cities. And Mexico City is not a small city by any measure. It's definitely over 1 million people. It may be 2 or 3. I'm not even quite sure, but it's a pretty big city. So the fact that these are still supplying a significant amount of food to the city, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty cool.
Pero evidentemente no van a regresar nada más porque sí. O van a regresar porque, ay, pues sí, hay que hacer hoyos en los canales. No, hay que darles una comercialización eficiente de sus productos. Hay que hacerles un free trade con la gente que vive en la ciudad, con los restauranteros que viven en la ciudad y con todos los involucrados, ¿no? Porque para mí como mexicano, si Xochimilco desaparece, la Ciudad de México desaparece y desaparece mi cultura, ¿no? Entonces, por eso es la importancia del proyecto en cuanto a en cuanto a ecología se refiere, porque es parte de mi ciudad, ¿no? Entonces tengo que cuidar mi ciudad. ¿Y cómo lo voy a hacer? Pues hablándole a la gente, difundiendo el proyecto, diciéndole a la gente que aquí se produce, que pueden comprar canastas de verduras conmigo, que te voy a llevar un producto fresco a tu casa, millones de cosas. Sí, es súper importante. Pues más bien de agricultura. Yo lo aprendí por experiencia, porque yo estudié finanzas.
Okay.
Yo trabajé en banco 8 años, pero mi pasión es la ecología. Entonces, y restauración de sistemas ecológicos. Pero cuando conocí este sistema dije, pues soy mexicano, no tengo que viajar, me quedo en mi país y empecé a hacer un trabajo aquí. Ahora, de ser un trabajo ya pasó a ser una empresa y ahora es una empresa de turismo también. Entonces, ya dio sus dos ramificaciones, ¿no? Entonces, hacemos turismo y promovemos la venta de los productos.
Well, that's really cool that they've even diversified to doing some ecotourism. I mean, how many of you would love to do a tour of these? Like, just go all through all these canals and see all the food production? I know that I would. That's a pretty cool way to make a living, or at least part of a living. That's really cool.
Yo tengo una chinampa donde yo produzco y esa pronto la pondré a disposición de turismo para poder llevar a la gente hacia allá. Pero mi trabajo aquí es reactivar la chinampería. Entonces, al hacer ese trabajo, he conocido sobre agricultura, porque he estado con los productores, me dan algunos consejos, ¿no? Me dicen, tienes que sembrar así, o para controlar cualquier plaga hay que utilizar esto, hay que utilizar el otro, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, así fue como he adquiriendo mis conocimientos aquí. Mi ex esposa era bióloga y pues ella también estaba desarrollándose en un entorno como este, ¿no? Entonces también aprendí de ahí. Entonces, el proyecto se ha desarrollado de una manera muy positiva y es bien importante porque cuando yo llegué aquí hace 10 años no había nada. No había más que productores en pequeño y vendían en la central de abastos o en el mercado de Xochimilco, pero no había nadie que promoviera sus productos en otros lados o directo con el cliente, ¿no? Por eso se llama de la chinampa a tu mesa, ¿no? Porque es directo de aquí a la mesa del comensal. Yo he trabajado con los mejores restauranteros de México, pero ahora ya no es mi interés general que ellos trabajen conmigo, porque además de que es problemático con los pagos, porque ellos te pagan 15 o 30 días después, y un agricultor no puede vivir a ese tiempo, tiene que vivir al día, ¿no? Vive al día, vive de la cosecha y de la venta del producto en el mercado, ¿no? Entonces yo tenía que financiar.
Welcome, John. Good to see you tonight. We're talking about Chinampas tonight, which are kind of these constructed aquatic gardens that you put out into a body of water, and it kind of absorbs all the nutrients and the water up from underneath, and then you have really productive farmland, like some of the most productive farmland. So this guy's going through and giving a tour of the Chinampas that he manages, or at least knows about, that supply to Mexico City to this day. A significant amount of food, it sounds like.
Todo eso. Y era muy complicado, ¿no? Ahora los restauranteros vinieron aquí, rentan sus propias chinampas y producen su propio alimento. Eso era lo que yo quería. Porque al final de cuentas, yo no pretendo monopolizar Xochimilco, sino lo que yo quiero es que se reactiven las chinampas. Y no me importa quién sea, ¿no? Entonces, yo reactivo de este lado, el restaurante reactiva de este lado, el otro restaurante reactiva de este lado, el otro restaurante de este lado, y entonces se hace un mundo de gente que está produciendo. Y eso es lo que yo quiero, que se produzcan las chinampas, ¿no? Entonces, mi trabajo es hacer eso, buscar chinampas que estén abandonadas, reactivarlas y después ver quién la puede comercializar, ¿no? Si yo la puedo comercializar, yo tomo los productos que necesito y lo comercializo, ¿no? Entonces, este proyecto nació con esa idea y la seguimos fielmente porque es súper importante para nosotros que se pueda producir de esta manera, ¿no? Además, pues son productos biológicos, son productos ecológicos, no tienen pesticidas, tienen una agricultura.
And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. It's not as though the Aztecs would have had access to pesticides or herbicides beyond perhaps some things they could have made locally. I don't really even know what would have been available to them, but definitely not on a large scale, definitely not on an industrial scale. So they would have had to farm in a way that minimizes the loss to predators, you know, whether that be bugs or other sort of wildlife coming in and eating it, while at the same time producing as much as possible. So it makes a lot of sense that, you know, these systems just naturally find this equilibrium where you have, you know, birds and fish and other predatory bugs and stuff that together kind of keep in check, or at least a dynamic equilibrium, the various so-called pests that might want to take all the stuff for themselves, all the food that you're trying to grow for themselves.
Netamente tradicional. Todo ese cultivo que usted ve verde, esas son flores de cempasúchil para el Día de Muertos.
By green crop, I assume he means the greenhouse, or it looks more like maybe a I don't know if hoop house is the right term for it, but basically serves like the function of greenhouse. So they're diversifying even beyond producing food. They're producing flowers for the Day of the Dead festival. There's all kinds of things. It's only limited really by your imagination what you can grow once you have a really productive ecological system going. So it doesn't all have to be food either.
Ahorita es la temporada en donde las plantas están creciendo para cosecharse en noviembre. A finales de octubre, principios de noviembre, se empiezan a vender. Y se termina de cosechar flores y entonces se vuelve a poner otro tipo de flores u hortalizas, según la necesidad del productor. Estas plantas se llaman ninfas y estas plantas son endémicas, nacen aquí. Lo contrario del lirio, esta planta tiene su ciclo, nace, reproduce y se muere. Y vuelve a nacer en primavera y así. Y termina cuando empieza el otoño, se termina. Puede estar cortando el tule por dos razones. La primera es para abrir canal que se pueda pasar, y la segunda es que utilizan el tule para amarrar los manojos de las cosechas. Lo secan, se hace más fuerte y con eso amarran las cosechas.
So we're seeing a couple of principles here. There's the stacking of functions, so that they're using one thing to do another thing. So the reeds, other than often being used to create the beds of the chinampas, they're using them to tie up other crops. And then also they're producing no waste. They're taking something that might otherwise be a waste product. You know, we've got to clear out the canals of all these reeds so that we can pass, but they're instead using it for a useful purpose, because every waste product is an input to something else, you know. So just because it may be a nuisance to you, it's Bill Mollison would always put it like, you don't have an X problem, you have a lack of X problem. So you don't have a snail problem, you have a lack of ducks to eat those snails problem. You don't have a reed problem, you have perhaps a lack of what to do with those reeds in a more productive way problem. So it's a different way of thinking of things. So John says, where do all the oil pipelines go, and what do we and where do we drain the mining runoff? Those are some difficult issues to grapple with as well. It's almost as if all you need is a little boat that you can paddle around, and a few hand tools to cultivate and harvest what you have, without ever even needing to dip into the oil pipeline and its various products. So ecological management sounds great. Yeah, it does sound pretty cool. And the promise of permaculture overall is that if you follow its principles and its ethics, you get a system that takes a lot of work up front to set up. So like, imagine having to dredge these canals to begin with. I'm sure they weren't all perfectly, a good level for the boats to pass. I'm sure there's a lot of clearing that had to happen initially. I'm sure there's a lot of construction of the Chinampas that had to go on initially. But once you get things going, the natural balances of things, the inertia of nature, it becoming more of an ecosystem that sort of self-manage itself, all those things start to take place. And so you're doing less work later on, and less and less and less, to the point where you can cultivate things with just a few hand tools and maybe a boat. Yeah, balance is very important. That's a good point, Natalie. Very good point. So that's the goal with permaculture, is to do less overall. Do a lot of stuff up front, get the right conditions set so that you're not making what's known as a type 1 error, which is something that costs you extra effort for its entirety of its existence. So for example, if you wanted to have a Chinampa, but the only body of water on your property that you had access to was 3 miles away. Like, you would say you have a very large piece of property. If your only access to water was 3 miles away, and you wanted to grow things that you needed to look after daily, trying to do that sort of thing might be called a type 1 error, because you're spending most of your time then traveling back and forth, when maybe the better solution would be to locate your house closer to where you're going to need to be interacting with the various planting beds more often. So we're trying to avoid that sort of thing also with permaculture. Yeah, so there's another principle from the Permaculture Designer's Manual is pretty simple. It's pretty universal. It's work with nature instead of against it. So Vrinsky says the introduction of tilapia was a type 1 error. That very well could be. You do have to be very careful when you're introducing new species, whether they are whether they are plants or animals or whatever they are. You have to be very careful when you're introducing new species to a land, because it could become very invasive. It could cause a lot of headaches for you as well as the local wildlife. And the last thing you want to do is cause more harm than you're doing good. So if tilapia is not native to where you are, that might not be a good thing to do if there's a chance that it could escape and wreak havoc. Now, fortunately for, say, like northern climates like my own, I live in Minnesota, tilapia don't survive the winters. So even if you were farming tilapia during the summertime in like a closed lake or whatever, there's really no chance that it's ever going to take over. On the other hand, then you have to basically harvest everything every year, because anything that you don't harvest is just going to die, unless you have a greenhouse, in which case you can extend that season. But assuming you're just out on the land, that wouldn't be necessarily a problem. But that's not to say that you should never use any sort of crop that's not native to where you're at. You kind of have to you have to have a little nuance to your thinking. Perhaps trees like apple trees or whatever are naturalized to your area, even if they're not native. They've found their niche within the ecosystem. They don't dominate to the point of crowding out other things that you might like, or things that might destabilize the local ecology completely. So that wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing to add to your space. So it's all about finding that right balance, and knowing what you're doing, knowing the characteristics of what you're introducing, if you are introducing something that's not native to your land. But I don't think it's reasonable to just do locally native stuff, because for one thing, ecologies are never static. They're always changing. Just the natural flow of creatures around the world with changes to climate, and perhaps storms blow, bunches of creatures off course, and they end up in a place they're not native to, but end up thriving. There's all sorts of ways that creatures can, by themselves, get around the planet, and perhaps even become invasive. It's not necessarily an unnatural thing for a non-native species to be introduced and to wreak havoc on the local ecosystem. So it is something that happens in nature. We just have to be careful as actors in nature that can have an outsized influence as compared to other animals, that we have to be careful that we know more or less what we're doing before we do it. We have a good idea of what the repercussions are going to be before we put anything in. All right, let's continue on.
Eso es un nopal, pero es un nopal que da fruta, que es la tuna. La tuna. La industria del maquillaje usan la plaga del nopal, como esta, para hacer el lipstick. Mire.
Yeah.
Este color,
look at that.
Es el que usan para hacer lipstick.
You use that as a natural pigment for lipstick.
Este color rojo no va a desaparecer de mis dedos.
Stay on his fingers until tonight. That's really cool. So you bring up a good point there, John. Well, we shipped rats around the world. We did not know what we were doing. And I don't know what the current theory is, but last I heard, the speculation was that one of the biggest contributors to the downfall of Easter Island, you may be familiar with Easter Island, how it was completely depopulated of people. There was no people left at some point. They all died out. There is speculation that the rats that were introduced by, I believe it was Captain Cook was the first one to visit them, that they got off the ship and they started eating at the local trees, and eventually killed them all. And without trees, they were the local Polynesians of Easter Island, the Easter Islanders, were basically dead as a culture and as a people, because they depended on trees for making shelters, of course, but also for making their ships, their canoes, their ocean-going canoes that they would use to fish, to trade with other peoples. So by the time Captain Cook came back to Easter Island, it was a completely different scene. I think it was Captain Cook. I may be mixing up my explorers. It could have been Abel Tasman. It was one or the other. But anyway, the point is, by the time that particular European explorer came back, he found a basically doomed people. They were hardly going out to try and fish with what few boats they had left. They basically had given up. It's very sad. So it can be really bad, the things that we introduce, even unintentionally, to new places. Smallpox is another big one. Smallpox devastated the North American and probably the South American people that were native to the lands. That was probably the biggest devastation to them of all, was introducing the smallpox virus. And there are definitely a lot of stories about it being purposely introduced in cases, but I think for the most part it was not. But that's just one small thing, one small change that can really have a devastating effect, and it really reduced the population in North America. One of the reasons that Native Americans had such trouble putting up a big resistance as colonists moved west was because a lot of them were dying from smallpox. So, yeah, the things we do can have big consequences. So that's why I gotta emphasize that it's important that we know what we're doing before we change something in a local ecology, especially before we introduce something new. But if you're in like the suburbs of some place, there's a good chance that your entire local biome has been completely manipulated and redone. I know that around here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, if you see a big tree, like almost 9 times out of 9, it's going to be a cottonwood tree. And the reason is because every other big tree was cut down for lumber. But it just so happens that cottonwood's not very good for lumber. It's not very good for pulp. For whatever reason, it's just not a highly sought after wood product, right? So they tended to leave those trees. So they tend to be the only remnants left of the old forest. So even if you look on the riverbanks, you'll see a lot of maples that, maybe about that big a gauge, maybe a foot across, maybe a little bit more, but you won't see much bigger than that. It's about 30 to 40-year-old forest because of that. So it's been so totally destabilized and redone that if you're introducing something new into that sort of a damaged and redone ecosystem, there's less of a chance that it's going to really harm something fragile. Okay. Now, if you're way out in the countryside, that may be a different story entirely. You may want to be very careful about the things you introduce because there's more of a chance that there's not necessarily pristine, at least not in Minnesota. There are still some places, but more or less less disturbed natural areas, and you really don't want to have those be something that you destabilize. I see, Natalie, you switched back over to Facebook. That's very cool. Yeah, and we've been rats of all sorts also for cultural destruction. That's true. Capitalism. Yeah, that's another sort of invasive species. Cultural ideas can be an invasive species, especially ones that are very exploitation oriented, such as capitalism. And that can be something that is unwelcome in places, and yet we force it on other cultures all the time through the various apparatuses of capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, basically just forcing our will on countries that don't really have the means to defend themselves in any way. Land ownership, the entire concept of land ownership, that could be an invasive species. That's definitely something that's much more been hardened during the time of capitalism. So very good. Hello, Dr. Watt. We're talking about Chinampas tonight. So we're just discussing, having a little sidebar on invasive species and stuff like that. So welcome in. Yeah, hope you guys, if you're enjoying this content and you're watching on Twitch, give me a follow. I definitely appreciate that. And if you really like it, you can always subscribe as well. And that definitely helps me out, gives me a little bit of extra income that I can then devote to spending more time doing this sort of stuff. So John, you've been trying out Twitch, but you know little so far. It takes a little bit to get used to Twitch. That's definitely true. Especially when you get into communities that are more acculturated towards, Twitch lingo, and there's a whole family of emojis that are very specific, have very specific meanings in Twitch chat. You won't be able to see it if I typed it here, but there's ones like the guy making the weird face, and that's supposed to be irony. Was that a kappa? I even get the names of these emojis confused, but there's the guy who's like going like this and laughing. That's just haha. But there's all sorts of stuff that it takes a while to get to understand what people are talking about. So it's a different world to get used to, that's for sure. But I found it very rewarding myself because for one thing, it's the live experience. You always get to interact with people as they're putting stuff out there. So you get to be really a part of a community. It's not just this parasocial relationship that happens more so on like YouTube, where you put out a video and there's comments and stuff like that, but not necessarily as much interaction. thing about Twitch is it's all about that live interaction, and of course Facebook is trying to copy that, and even Twitter has gotten on the bandwagon. I'm streaming live to Twitter as well, and to a lesser extent Facebook, but it tends to be that people stream primarily live to Twitch just because there are easier ways to monetize that as well. You can have people subscribe to you, which gives you a little bit of income, and then they get special emojis from your channel that they can use other places. It's kind of, it's a fun little reward system, and people can donate directly, just, small amounts of money or whatever. So there you have it. But anyway, I think we should move on in the video.
Y es una plaga que se ocupa. Por eso se deja. Estas son las plantas madres. Estas nunca se cortan porque dan fruto. En el caso del nopal, las plantas madres es lo mismo, pero cada espina es un nopal que se puede comer. Entonces todo el tiempo están produciendo nopales. Aquí no se necesita controlar el cultivo, sino que solamente solito va creciendo, 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 y solo se cosecha el nopal, se deja y vuelve a crecer, se corta y vuelve a crecer. Y si yo quisiera hacer una planta nueva de nopal, yo corto una planta madre y la tiro al piso. Y de aquí va a salir otro nopal.
And you'll find that's the case with a lot of cacti and succulents, the kind of more leathery skin plants, where all you have to do to multiply it yourself, to propagate it. It's called vegetative propagation, as opposed to doing it from seed. So basically it's a clone. So, be careful with that as well. Know that any sort of clone you make is going to have the exact same genetics as the mother plant it comes from, and will be susceptible, therefore, to all the same diseases and pests as the mother plant. But anyway, it is very easy to propagate both cacti and clones. Not sure what that was. The captions on Facebook are in Spanish. No. I think you just have to turn off captions then, because I'm just using captions that are embedded within the video. I don't even have captions turned on the YouTube video. I think that's probably something that you would have to do yourself. But probably just turn captions off. You shouldn't need any extra captions. You should be able to see them just from the video. So give that a try and see how that goes. I don't know if we just have an event. I don't know. Anyway. Succulents and cacti are very easy to propagate. It's auto captions in Facebook. Yeah, you should be able to turn those off. There should be some way. I'm not as familiar with Facebook Live as I am with Twitch, but there should be some way to do it. Let's see. Wellspring CP. Do you believe that cities and industrialism are bad? No, I do not. In fact, my master's degree is in urban planning. I love cities, and I want them to be better. And in fact, the most sustainable way for people to live, for the most part, is to be either spread out across the country or concentrated within a city. The least sustainable way for people to live is within suburbs, because you still have all of the infrastructure of a city, but you have the spacing that's more or less like rural areas. So it takes a lot more infrastructure, and and especially when you get into things like lawn care and stuff like that, it takes a lot more energy to maintain those spaces than if you had just, say, 10 acres and you only mowed a little bit for your front yard. So no, definitely not against industrialization, definitely not against cities. I think they're vital for human flourishing, really. Cities are where most of the great ideas of the world come from. Just for the simple fact, and there's nothing special about people that live in cities that makes that so. It's just that because you have more interactions with your neighbors, there's just a natural synergy that takes place, an interaction between these ideas and these people being in closer proximity, that it tends to generate better ideas than if things are slower to spread, because people are physically spread out. So yeah, I love cities. I want to make them a lot better. So this is part of it. Applying permaculture principles to urban living is definitely one way we can get there. I think it's probably our best chance to stem the tide of global warming, while at the same time providing more abundance and a closer connection to the earth for everyone that's involved. And everyone can do permaculture. I live in an apartment on the 3rd floor, and I still do permaculture. You can see a few of the plants I have behind me. I don't think any of those are edible, but I have a passion fruit vine that's now taken over my biggest window in my living room. I have aloe plants. I have a monstera, which is also edible. A bunch of different things. And if a bunch of us do these little things, it's not going to ever be enough to sustain us completely within the city, but it's definitely going to be better than taking all the land in farming areas or in rural areas and plowing it all under to satisfy the needs of the city. So you don't understand how I think that I can integrate all of this agriculture and horticulture into people's busy lives. Well, that's definitely a challenge. People have to want to do this sort of thing first and foremost, but it doesn't have to be all that difficult. I mean, you could just grow a pot of herbs, find a sunny window and put some seeds. In fact, sprouts, that's another great way to just do a little bit of food within whatever space you have. All you need is access to light, and you need a source of seeds and a little bit of dirt and a container to put them in, and you can grow stuff too. It doesn't have to be, all of your needs, as I say, but every time you take from that vessel, even if it's just like herbs, like say you grow like a little basil plant or something, when you put that in your pasta, it's going to taste a lot better just because that you made it yourself. And that, I think, is important. That alone gives us a greater connection to the earth that we depend on. And we literally depend on the earth to grow stuff for us and to keep us alive. Okay, lots of comments, so I'm trying to get to them as I can. I let my backyard, this is John T1. We have a couple Johns in the chat, so I'll try to differentiate there. I let my backyard go for the wild animals in deer, fox, rabbits, snakes, cats, mice. Yeah, that's awesome. You can have a little ecosystem, like a microbiome right within your backyard. Just by growing a few native wildflowers, you can support local bumblebees and other native bees. There's all sorts of things that you can do. It doesn't have to be large scale. And then when it comes to rural areas that support people that live in the city, because we have to remember that to live in a city, you are dependent on the rural areas, literally, for your food. If they are to adopt these sorts of principles, they'll need less land, they'll be more productive, they'll need less machinery. It takes a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more planning, but there's definitely some big gains that can happen if you apply these sorts of principles. Let's see. So Seculoid says, I have a garden, bell peppers grow themselves, not gonna lie. Yeah, basically. Yeah, I have one too. And, I only harvested 3 or 4 bell peppers off it, but they tasted really good. And it was really nice to have that just outside my window. And to watch a little bit of nature happen right before your eyes. So why is it intrinsically valuable, says Wellspring CP, for me, a programmer, to be connected to the earth? I can let a farmer produce my food. Why do I need to be connected to the earth? Okay, so that's an important question. And for me, it's because that connection is what bridges what is known in philosophy as the is-ought gap. You can describe the world as it is using philosophy, using science. You can make predictions about how the world could be if you manipulate it this way or that way. But what you can't do with those disciplines is tell people how it ought to be. You can't say we should care about the earth or we should care about the future generations. There's no amount of reasoning that's going to mathematically solve the equation that says you have to care about future generations or the world that you're dependent on. But by doing these things, by introducing beauty and a physical connection to the earth, there's a chance that on a more visceral level, you will start to care about these things. And when you change what you care, you change that ought part of the equation. You say, I care about how this world is. I care about the future generations. I now care if, this pipeline goes through my backyard and potentially threatens all my neighbors. It takes that level of caring to really make any sort of change. Change always has to start with a feeling, with a want for a certain outcome. So I think that's why it's good, just to get your hands touching soil, touching living things, observing living things, even if it's just a little bit. I can switch something in your brain that all of a sudden makes you care about something that you maybe would just intellectualize otherwise. And we can intellectualize things. We can care on an intellectual level. Sure, I would like this sort of an outcome, but it's completely different to feel a connection to something and to have that deeper connection to it. Right? So we can say, oh, global warming is bad, and I'll do this, that, and the other thing, but to actually, be connected to someone who's being affected by it, that would put a totally different lens on your worldview. Now it becomes personal. And for any sort of good change to happen, whatever it is you're looking for, people have to care. So that's why. All right. So John T1 says, my backyard connects with others in unused areas. That's wonderful. So altogether, you've taken your little bit, what could be a fragmented section of backyard, and you've combined it with a bunch of others to make a more of a less contiguous, I should say, ecosystem. That's pretty cool, And it's a small change, but it could be the difference between life or death for a lot of the plants and animals that live in that space. So that's really cool. So you don't like interacting with nature because it's dangerous. And I prefer to be as far removed from nature as possible. Or from danger, I assume what you meant to say then. What about people like me? I don't like pets. I don't have animals. What about people like me who aren't interested? Are you afraid of plants? I mean, would a bell pepper scare you? To bring up that example again? I would hope not. There's nothing really scary about what's going on in just your average vegetable or herb garden, or even just having houseplants. I mean, it doesn't even have to be something that's necessarily productive, as long as it means something to you. You don't have to have pets. That's fine. You can have other people have that. At the same time, you are dependent. You're literally dependent on the interaction of plants and animals to keep you alive. Without the manure to be produced from certain animals, you wouldn't have food. You wouldn't have a lot of the food that we have today. That's one thing that keeps that nutrient cycle going is animals. You need animals to break down plants. You need microbes and fungi to break down animals. And you need plants to take up all those nutrients again so that we can put it back into the system. It's all interconnected. So yeah, I mean, like I said, there's no argument that I can give you that's going to be just like a rationally laid out thing of this is why you need to care about the earth. This is why you need to care about nature and having a connection to it. All I can say is try it, get a plant, any sort of plant. It doesn't have to be a food plant. It can be any sort of plant that catches your eye. See if that does anything for you. If it doesn't, no big deal. But I bet you it might. There's a good chance that it might. Once you're actually taking care of something that's beyond yourself, that can also change your perspective. And once you're just even a little bit more closer to the source of all energy and life, which is the natural ecology of the world, that too can change your perspective for the better in my point of view. So you trade with farmers, so I delegate my dependence to the farmers. True. But again, that you have an intellectual dependence on them. It's far different to have that literal in front of you, tangible connection to a living thing. Even if that's a plant, that can make a big difference. It's oh, sorry, I'm getting a spam call. It's all I can just say is just try, Like I said, there's no argument that I can say where, well, at the end of this, logically, I should go and get a plant. All I can say is just try it, really. Or at least walk in a park from time to time. Touch trees. Physically connect, right? I guarantee it'll do something for you. Maybe even a little bit. Change your perspective just a little bit. Take it from something that you intellectually know, something that makes sense on paper, to something that you're experiencing. I guess that's a different way of putting it. Let's see. All right. I think I missed maybe a comment there. Let me scroll down. Oh, shoot. Let me scroll down here. Oh. And that chat's way behind, isn't it? Okay. All right. So you asked then, Wellspring, how do I feel about... I'll put that up on the screen, in fact. This will make things easier. This is one cool feature of Restreams. You can put comments straight up onto the screen. How do you feel about vertical farming? It's done in a controlled indoor environment where the plants don't interact with local flora and fauna and no ecosystem gets developed at all. Do you like vertical farming? It can be done that way. I think there's a huge danger in doing it that way, actually. If you're doing it that way where you're only putting in nutrients and getting out, certain plant material, and there's no interaction with other life forms of any kind, that means that anything that gets in could devastate that entire crop. You basically have to maintain almost lab-like sterility in the rest of your operation in order for that sort of thing to work. The alternative is to recreate an ecosystem, just have it inside. So you have a greenhouse, but you have plants and animals and microbes and fungi and all sorts of things that are interacting with one another to keep things in dynamic equilibrium. You simulate wind as much as possible. Most people don't know, but when a plant grows without wind, it tends to produce weaker stems because it doesn't need to. But because of the micro abrasions from being blown in the breeze, that triggers it like a muscle. Like when you're working out and you have micro tears in your muscle, that triggers your body to make a stronger muscle. Likewise with a plant, when it blows in the wind, it produces a stronger stalk in response. It reinforces that with cell division. So the closer you can get to a real functioning ecosystem indoors, the better off you're going to be. And I'll tell you, in my living room, we have over 100 plants. I don't know our current total. It's just one of the hobbies of my wife and I that we like to go out and get plants. We get usually a plant a week. That's about our average. So now we have over 100. But because we're not interacting with other parts of the ecosystem, anytime a pest is introduced, say like a mealybug, that can have devastating consequences. I almost lost my banana tree, my oldest plant, which is literally getting to be about 4 or 5 feet high. I've had it since it was, maybe 6 inches tall. I almost lost my banana tree to mealybugs, and I tried everything to do it, to deal with them. I picked them off manually. I sprayed them with neem oil. I did a whole bunch of different things, and what finally worked was, unfortunately, a systemic pesticide. And I mean, it's not producing bananas, so it's not like I have any danger of eating the pesticide. But because I'm outside of the ecosystem, any sort of tip to that really fragile balance can throw everything off. So like I said, I almost lost that tree. We almost lost, and we did lose a number of plants due to mealybugs. They're difficult to deal with. Had we been constructing an entire indoor ecosystem, had we been able to introduce habitat for the natural predators of mealybugs, that might not have been the case. But we weren't able to do that, at least not in time. We were in danger of losing a lot of things. And that was kind of our last resort. So yeah, that's my little anecdote for that. But it applies to the sort of vertical farming where things have to be really biosecure in order to function. I think it's really dangerous, and it's ultimately really fragile. It's a really fragile way of doing things. Alternatively, you can do things like aquaponics, where you have fish that produce waste that then gets fed through grow beds And the roots of the plants that you're trying to grow, the food plants, take up those nutrients, filter the water, so they provide an ecological service for the fish, and you start to get just the rudiments of an ecosystem. You have the fish waste broken down by microbes, taken up as nutrients for the plants, which clean the water and make the fish happier and healthier. And then also you can take, you can start adding on other components to make it even more of a closed loop ecosystem. You can take your food waste and feed them to black soldier flies, or their larvae, I should say. We'll get to that in a future video, but just know that right now these grubs, they break down food at a very fast rate. You can then take those grubs and feed them to your fish. So you're turning a food waste product into an input for your system that you're not even having to pay for or ship in or anything. You're starting to become closer to that functioning ecosystem. Think about a forest. Let's back up for just a moment. Think about a forest, just a naturally occurring forest. Who waters that forest? Who goes out there and rakes that forest? Who does all these different services? Who fertilizes the forest? If it's not something that's interacted with by people, it's not people. And yet somehow they have enough water to keep growing these trees. They have enough fertilizer to be healthy. And in terms of pests, there's a dynamic equilibrium where if one thing gets into a out of control state, their natural predator comes in and their populations take off, and eventually things are brought back down into equilibrium. All of these services are provided for free by natural ecosystems. So we can mimic that sort of a system and get a lot of gains for free, basically, or we can do everything very, in a very logical but hermetically sealed way, where we have X amount of nutrients that we input. We make it from, oil, if we're talking about like nitrogen or whatever. And then we get an output of a certain number of crops. And it's very, tidy and predictable, but like I keep coming back to, very fragile. Let's see what else we got here. I've been missing a few of the comments. You can't convince everyone, and that is the point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it may just be that I don't convince you, and that's fine. But I've enjoyed taking this opportunity to kind of, they're good questions, whether or not you mean them in good faith or not, which it seems like you do. But it's given me the opportunity to kind of articulate why it is that these things are so important. All right. I think I'm just going to do a few more comments, and then we'll get back to the video, because I do want to get through the whole thing. And we're just about halfway done, but that means we got a long way to go. So, and I see Renske is having to bow out and will not be on the stream tonight, unfortunately. We'll catch you another time then. But okay. It's extremely unlikely that vertical farming businesses would want to waste space on fungi and superfluous elements. It's strange that you think that fungi would take up extra space. Maybe you're just thinking about the fruiting body of mushrooms, because, I don't know. I thought it was common knowledge, but maybe it's not. Most of a fungi is underground. It is it's called the hyphae. It is these little tendrils that stretch out for sometimes hundreds or thousands of miles into the soil. That thing that pops up, that mushroom, is only the fruiting body. So we're not talking about taking extra space just to grow mushrooms, although you can do that too. We're just talking about the natural fungi that occur, right? So yeah, I'm not quite sure where you're going with that. Wasting space. And depending on what fungi you grow, that could be another crop for you, right? Plenty of fungi are edible. So they would be renting the farming space, and they would need to maximize revenue per square foot of vertical farming space. Right. So you're only thinking of things in very spreadsheet sort of a sense. You're not thinking about potential disasters. How much money would they lose if they had a catastrophic failure due to some pathogen being introduced inadvertently, maybe on someone's shoe as they come in. Those are, if you maximize for a certain sort of efficiency, you are minimizing for resilience. There's almost always that trade-off there. So a very well-oiled machine, right? All it takes is something to be thrown into the wrong cog at the wrong time, and it can destroy the entire operation. The same is true of these vertical farms. It doesn't take that much to completely wipe out everything you've done, and then where are you? If instead you provide extra space, but also space that you can use for growing things that you also can sell or use yourself. Oh boy. You have a lot of text that you're going to type, huh? Anyway. Yeah, lost my train of thought there, so we'll move on. But it's not just about maximizing, profit per square foot. There's a lot more that goes into it. There's also long-term resilience to outside shocks. There is the interaction of different organisms with one another. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming, where you grow corn, and that acts as a stake to grow beans on. Now, those beans, they fix nitrogen into the soil. Nitrogen is a key ingredient. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are like the big three. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. So it fixes nitrogen from the air into the soil using soil-living microbes. Now, if you kill the entire soil, that process doesn't happen. Okay? It's not fixing nitrogen if it's completely sterile. So you have that. So through the interaction of these microbes and the beans, you have a certain amount of nitrogen that's now available to the corn, which happens to be a high nitrogen feeder. It needs a lot of that particular fertilizer to grow tall and make what you would consider a good size piece of corn on the cob. Add into that the squash. The squash is the third of the sisters. The squash puts out a lot of leaves, just about 6 inches tall, so it's not going to shade out any of the corn or the beans, but it's going to cover the soil. And what that's going to do is it's going to prevent erosion and compaction through raindrops, which is, in fact, one of the biggest sources of erosion, especially in a field, is impacting of weather on bare soil. So you have that now in there. It also benefits from the nitrogen that the beans are putting out. So all three of these things interact with one another in a way that produces more for each of them than they each would have had on their own. Had you just stocked beans, they would not have been as productive. Had you just stocked corn, it wouldn't have been as productive. Same thing with squash. But putting them together, they synergize in a way that they all support one another. So there's a lot more than just, maximizing, X crop per square foot and getting a certain amount out versus a certain amount of stuff you put in. All right, let's move on in the comments here a little bit. Yeah, it definitely is a sort of capitalist mindset of what can I put in, what's the minimum I can put in versus my return on my investment. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be thinking at all about, you have to have some sustainability in the system. You can't be getting out less and less year after year. But if you apply permaculture techniques and you do it well, you're almost never going to have that. You're almost always going to be increasing the amount of yield that you have year after year. So Natalie says, I used to have a small, I'll put it up on the screen there. Used to have a small backyard ponds. Got hard with the upkeep, and I lost them and filled them in with rocks and gravel, sadly. No, that's not stupid at all. It's just that there perhaps was a different way that you could have managed it. Had you been applying... I didn't mean to put you on blast for that. Anyway, Natalie, it's probably something that had you just handled it differently, you could have gotten a good long-term use out of it. So Perhaps, I have no idea how you made the pond, but you probably put in a plastic liner. Perhaps instead you could have done a clay liner. And perhaps you could have introduced certain organisms that would keep, I don't actually know what the problem was. Maybe it was algae infill. But maybe you could have done that, attracted in some animals that would keep the algae at bay. Maybe it was mosquitoes. Maybe you could have put in some fish to take care of the mosquitoes. But the point being that there's almost always some form of ecology, whether it's a plant or an animal, that will perform more or less for free the function that you're looking to have performed, whether it's fertilizer, pest control, keeping things tidy or clear. There's probably something that you could have turned to. So, I mean, you shouldn't feel bad. That happens. I used to have a pond too, and eventually decided to fill it in because it was just getting very algae filled. But had I thought about it more, and had I been more in tune with permaculture principles, perhaps I would have done things differently and been able to save it. Okay. All right. I think this is going to be the last big comment that I'm going to do for now from you, Wellspring. I do appreciate your comments. But anyway, so you say you keep pointing out that the vertical farm will be fragile and susceptible to damage if it undergoes stress from an external influence. I think that the business will have an interest in ensuring that it keeps the farm resilient against that. Okay, but see, that's the opposite of resiliency. Resiliency means you can take shocks. So if there's a disaster, you have enough supplies to ride it out. Saying that in terms of like a family and going through a natural disaster, you have a place of shelter that you can go down into. That's what resilience means. It means that bad, catastrophic things can happen, but because of the systems that you have in place, you can weather the storm, metaphorically or literally. So in the case of this business, they have a huge vested interest in keeping things hermetically sealed away from the outdoors and its influence. But people are still people, and all it would take then is one careless person when they're decontaminating and going into the space, or one bad batch of seeds maybe that's contaminated. You never know how it can be introduced. You can do your best to hermetically seal things from the outside, but nothing is ever 100%, especially if you have inputs coming in and outputs going out. That always leaves open the door for something unwanted to come in. So my thinking is that it's better to have a system that can naturally handle that sort of thing rather than just being hyper vigilant all the time. And when I talk about the different synergies that can happen when you plan things well as more of an ecosystem, I think the benefits of resilience way outweigh the benefits of a high performing, so to speak, but very efficient but not very resilient system. Oh, you're quite welcome, and you've given me some opportunities, Wellspring, to better articulate why these things are important and what the thinking in permaculture is as to why you do things in a certain way. All right, I think I'm almost to the end now. Maximizing profits is unsustainable, and that's usually going to be the case. If you maximize profits at a business, in the short term, things are going to be good for you as the owner, but in the long term, if you end up wearing out your employees to the point where they literally can't work, and you run out of people to replace them with, well, then at some point you've gone and shot yourself in the foot. So you've not built any sort of resilience into the system. You're just exploiting for your own benefit for a short term. And capitalism works really well, in a certain sense, in the short term. As a business owner, you can make a lot of profit very fast if you don't care about long-term consequences. For example, if you're a mining company and you dump all of your tailings into a local watershed, you're going to make more profit because you're not going to have to worry about proper disposal. But in the long term, you're going to poison the people that are your that you're dependent on for running your mine. So in the short term, pretty good for you. And that tends to be the way that capitalism conducts itself around the world. They go in, they extract as much as they can in the short term, and they don't really care about long-term consequences because they've gotten out with all the money in time. I think that's not a very good way to run the world. I think we don't all have to be subjected to that, or the vast majority of us have to be subjected to that just for the benefit of the very few privileged that are in the position of being capitalists. Yeah, and John, you say that koi are usually resistant to cold, and that can be a problem. There are places in Minnesota where people have dumped out koi and other goldfish, and they've become acclimatized to their local pond or whatever. That can be a problem. They can, cause disruptions to ecologies and stuff like that. Costs are socialized. That's a good way of putting it, John. All right, moving on here. Thank you all for the comments. I really do appreciate that. Oops. All right, shortcuts done for capital gain hurt long term. Very well said, Natalie. Very good. And costs are outsourced, as I just mentioned. You say in there. Let's move on in the video. But yeah, thank you all for those comments. That was very helpful for me to have a foil, more or less, to play my ideas off of, to help you understand.
Es muy lógica la naturaleza. Pues yo creo que en un 60% puede ser que sea nutritivo comer nopal, ¿no? Y si se come todos los días, pues no pasa nada. Además, el nopal tiene una sábila muy nutritiva y ayuda al aparato digestivo, ¿no? Entonces es algo muy bueno. Estos son agüejotes. Estos son los árboles que yo les decía, todos esos. Estos árboles son bien sencillos. Lo único que se tiene que hacer es cortar las ramas de los árboles y ponerlas en el lodo y vuelven a nacer.
I didn't mean foil in a bad way. I'm sorry. I just meant, something that you can, more or less you're playing devil's advocate, which isn't always a bad thing. No, that's not all you are to me. That's totally fine. It just meant you're presenting an opposing view that I can then bounce my ideas off of, and hopefully they shine brighter because of that, and hopefully people can understand better because of that. But I don't mean that's your only function there, Wellspring. So I didn't mean to insult you.
Y así es como reforestamos. Los usamos como fronteras o bordes, ¿no? Que separan chinampas.
Okay.
O los ponemos a las orillas de las chinampas porque mantienen estrechas y juntas las chinampas, fuertes, ¿no?
So this is an important part of the Chinampas, as I understand them. And I've never built one myself, so I'm just going based on what I've studied myself and the ones that I've seen. But they tend to have these trees, and he's holding up one. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm really not good at the native Aztec pronunciations. Ahuetl is my best guess. But anyway, it's this species of tree that you see lining things. It's very vertical. It has kind of a darker foliage you can see in the background there. And they use those to anchor the outsides of the chinampas so that their roots go down into the soil and they stabilize things. They form a border, and that's a living border. So here we go with resilience again. Whereas, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, I don't know if it's showing up or coming up on the audio, but give me 1 second. I'm going to close my window because the people outside are getting kind of loud. Sorry about that interruption there. They're having a good old time, and I was worried it was going to come through and be distracting for you. Anyway, so on the borders, you could have something that is man-made and perhaps very strong. You could put down. Let's just take an extreme example. We could say, rebar reinforced concrete. You can make the walls out of that around these Chinampas. So it'd be very strong and in a way very durable if you had reinforced concrete. Say the same sort of thing that they do for like bridge footings or something like that. However, no matter how strong you make it, as soon as you put it in the ground and it's set, nature starts reversing your work. It will never be self-healing. It will never fill in where there's a gap. So all it will then take is perhaps one crack and the whole thing could start falling apart. So that takes constant vigilance. So while this may be an efficient use of your time, in terms of you can just set it right there, you don't have to wait for trees to grow, you don't have to know anything about ecology to set a concrete wall, it's not resilient. It will not stand up to time. Time will always win in the end. Instead, if you put in these trees, their roots go down and they are a living, self-healing organism. So if some of the roots break under stress, it can send out new roots. If there's a big collection of water and it's making your soil too moist, it can send out more roots into that pocket and draw out some of that moisture. At the same time, it's supporting other biological functions. It could be supporting birds in the trees that may eat some of the bugs that would otherwise pester your plants, or you. They could be eating mosquitoes as well. There's all these different functions that are now stacked on top of those trees. It's not just an inert single function wall. It's a multifunction, living, self-healing system that you're putting in place when you're using those trees. So I think that just trying to highlight the contrast between resiliency and efficiency, and using natural ecosystems to your advantage versus imposing your will onto the land, just, with brute force. So I hope that helps. Let's go back to the video.
Para eso se usan. Esta es una siembra de aguejote. Del árbol aguejote es endémico.
Oh, it's a willow variety.
Y es
okay.
El lodo. Este es el lodo negro, ¿no? Con el que se utiliza. Pero, por ejemplo, si yo me llevara este árbol, me lo llevo a la ciudad, así como está, se va a morir. Necesita la humedad. Necesito envolver este lodo en una bolsa de plástico para conservar humedad y después trasplantarlo en una maceta y ya puede crecer, o reforestar en el suelo, ¿no?
So here's yet another function that using these trees can bestow on your land. Willows are some of the best trees at regenerating themselves. They have a real ability to, say a branch breaks off in the wind, that branch falls on the ground, it can just send out roots right from that branch and start a new whole tree. Okay, and that's the case with all the willows that I'm aware of. So I'm assuming it's with these ones too. So there's another function. You can actually take, so you can chop up a bunch of the branches of a willow tree, and you can leach out the hormones that help it root, that would help any branch that breaks off form new roots. I think there's a way of boiling it, but there's also probably a way of just soaking it out. And then you can take that and put other plants into that solution, and because of those growth hormones, they will then root much better than they otherwise would. So there's another function. You can use the trees to help propagate other plants. Also, willows, I don't know if all willows, but there's certainly particular varieties like white willow have medicinal properties. That's where acetaminophen comes from. I want to say aspirin. I'll look that up 1 second. Oh, and it doesn't matter. Anyway, it's an anti-inflammatory. It's what the original pain reliever was derived from, and I think it was generic aspirin. I hate that when I almost know something, but I can't quite get a hold of it. And reduce fevers and stuff like that. So a folk remedy is to use white willow bark if you have a fever or aches or pains or stuff like that. So that's perhaps another function that one tree could have that you wouldn't get out of having an inert man-made wall alone. So yeah. All right, we'll move on. I'll look that up.
Pero necesita crecer todavía más. Para que sobreviva, necesita tener una altura de 1,5 metros, casi 2 metros. Pero es una varita, prácticamente. O sea, ya así ya es cuando se extiende. Ahora vamos de aquel lado.
Cuando estás terminado con este y vas a poner algo más,
Ajá.
¿tienes algo que...
Un motocultor.
¿Y eso es lo que usas?
Sí.
Okay.
Ajá.
¿Y cuántas veces por año lo haces?
Todo el tiempo. Se termina de cosechar, se agarra la máquina y se pasa. Las raíces, las lechugas, todo lo que se quedó, que ya no se vendió, se regresa a la tierra y eso fertiliza el suelo. Se le puede agregar un poco de fertilizante de vaca, de caballo o de borrego y se extiende y se deja unos días en lo que la planta crece y ya, ¿no?
¿Y tiene
Y
que
otra vez.
ser de vaca viejo? Old manure?
No
es
necesariamente,
fresca, puede
es
ser
fresca, puede ser fresca. El olor es intenso, pero al revolver todo el cultivo ya se pierde.
Thank you, John. So the active ingredient in medicine made from white willow, oops, there we go, is called salicin, not acetaminophen. I was mistaken. So I got my Tylenol and my aspirin mixed up. So yeah, some people use it, white willow bark, as an alternative to aspirin, particularly those that experience chronic headaches or back pain. So yeah, and just briefly searching for that too, it looks like there's a number of different willows that still possess that is it salicylic acid? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, that same active ingredient that's in aspirin. So hey, perhaps another benefit to using these trees.
Aquí tenemos, yo creo que cerca de 50,000 lechugas aproximadamente, que se plantaron hace un mes. Esto es un cultivo de espinacas. Si sienten el calor húmedo, mis lentes se empañan, de hecho.
And that's a good point too, Natalie, who says that she planted 2 willows long ago, and they were close to a pond that was with a liner. Let's just say the willows have strong roots that search out water. Yeah, you do have to be careful with willows because they will search out water and they will search out effluent as well. So they've been known to even break into sewer lines to get all of those nutrients out. Alternatively, though, if you look at it as a solution, there's such a thing as, is it called a willow bog, I want to say? I'll look that up soon too, in just a second. But basically, you can make an outhouse that empties into a stand of willows, and they will just eat all those nutrients right up, no problem. They are very hungry feeders, and they love water and nutrients. Those are the 2 favorite things. So yeah, good point. Be careful where you're selecting to put your willows, especially if you have some sort of thing that you don't want cracked through.
Se les da calor porque justamente se ponen amarillas si no las cubres. Pero lo que pasa es que se ponen amarillas porque tienen exceso de agua. Es en temporada de lluvias. Y esta no es de lluvias. Esta se empieza a sembrar a finales de temporada para cosecharse en diciembre. Este es el proceso principal. Los chinamperos sacan el lodo del canal, lo extienden en una cama de lodo como esta y luego lo dejan secar 3 días. Después de 3 días lo cortan y con los dedos van haciendo orificios. Y aquí ponen una semilla. Y después de 15 días empiezan a nacer. Esto es lo que pasa. Aquí hay brócoli, lechuga sangría, lechuga italiana, cilantro, espinaca. Y entonces, cuando ellos trasplantan, cuando estas plantas crecieron, se corta un pedazo de lodo, digámoslo así, y lo cortan. Y esta es una plantita, esta es otra, esta es otra, y esta es otra. Y entonces, cuando ya están a tiempo, se ponen así, se trasplantan, solo se pone, se sobrepone.
That's actually kind of cool the way they do that. So instead of having a lot of plastic containers, which is the common way of doing things, that's kind of one of the dirty secrets of the entire green industry. But especially when you have operations where you have a lot of transplants, a lot of times the plugs will at the very least come in these plastic trays. But he's showing that you don't even need to do that if you're doing everything on site and you have the right type of soil that holds together. So I'm assuming there's a high level of clay in it. All he's doing is cutting it apart and moving it by hand without any sort of need for any plastic except for the tarps. So it's not entirely a sustainable system, but it's definitely better than having to do what a lot of growers do when they're planting things like lettuce and other leafy type vegetables, for sure. But even things like tomatoes too usually are going to come in plugs, and plugs usually have to be contained by something. But he's shown that it doesn't have to be that way. So it's not anything that's inherent to the way a Chinampa functions. But it's just cool that he's recognizing a way to do less and still get a great result. This also kind of shows one of the struggles that you may have as a grower, in that you have to fit demand or you have to fit your production to local demand. It's usually not going to be the other way around. It's very hard to introduce a new food to a community that's not used to it. So if they're demanding things like lettuce or tomatoes, any of the staple annual vegetable crops, you may not have a choice. If you're trying to make a profit off of all of this, you may not have a choice but to at least do some of your production in what the people want. So that may not always line up well with the local climate. You see that he has to grow these things, at least to start with, under plastic. Otherwise, they get too hot. They kind of get burnt out. So he's having to shade it a little bit. So it's just a difficulty. I thought I'd bring that up as something to take into consideration. You might have a lot of stuff that's locally suitable, and that's another reason that it's incredibly difficult if you want to restrict yourself entirely to a quote unquote native palette of plants to work with. There may just not be a market, and if you're depending on a market to survive, you may just have to change to something different that people do want. Now, if you're doing this for subsistence, that changes. And if you're doing things for specialty markets, that equation might change as well. You may find that all you have to do, especially if you live in a diverse enough community, or at least have a market that's diverse enough around you, you may find that there's people who have been wanting to have something that you've been dying to grow. And it's just a matter of linking up those connections. But yeah, just things to keep in mind if you're actually thinking of doing any sort of food operation on your own.
Se cubre con paja porque se mantiene la humedad en el suelo y crece. El cilantro en un mes, esta plantita tiene, yo creo, una semana apenas, pero en un mes ya está para corte y venta al mercado. Es así de ese bote, sí,
Para
sacar el lodo. Así es. Se suben aquí con un aro de tela, meten el aro al agua y sacan el lodo y lo ponen ahí. Y después con una cubeta lo regresan para acá. Lo extienden y lo van limpiando. Le quitan todas las ramas de las hojas. Y entonces queda un lodo suave, limpio. Y ya que queda eso, entonces cuadriculan. Y con los dedos, no hay una herramienta para esto, solo con los dedos ponen los hoyos en el suelo. Ya que terminan, ponen las semillas una por una, le ponen abono, lo cubren con plástico para generar calor y empieza la magia. Empiezan a nacer las plantas.
Oh, so it needs extra heat, but still it's not suited to the
Es
local
un
climate.
proceso milenario, prehispánico y que aquí podemos cosechar 7 veces al año. El MIT en Estados Unidos apenas acaba de crear un microclima donde pueden tener 7 cosechas al año. Creado. Y nosotros lo tenemos aquí de manera natural. Esta fue una de las primeras chinampas a las que yo llegué. Y cuando yo llegué a esta chinampa, el productor solo tenía lechugas, o solo espinacas, o solo verdolagas. Un solo cultivo. A raíz del paso del tiempo, de estar hablando con él y de decirle, oye, tienes que cambiar la manera de sembrar, es más eficiente, aprovecha la tierra, fue cambiando. Y ahorita tiene aquí lechugas de 3 tipos, espinaca, acelga, jitomate, brócoli, maíz y algunas brotes de ejotes. O sea, ya tiene una variedad gigante de productos, ¿no? Esta chinampa fue la segunda que restauré con el dueño de esta chinampa. Él ahora ya no está trabajando conmigo porque él encontró a alguien que le puede ayudar y comercializar sus productos. Y eso está perfecto. Pero esta chinampa no tenía nada, nada. Y ahorita tiene zanahoria, espinaca, kale, brócoli, cebollas, flor de calabaza, calabaza. Tiene toda una gama de productos, ¿no? Y eso es mi trabajo, justamente. Reactivar, que se reactiven. Porque ellos, aunque muchos de los productos los compro yo de aquí, ellos tienen otros canales de ventas, pero ellos solos reactivan su economía. Y de eso se trata, de que sean autónomos y que reactiven su economía, ¿no? Porque eso es lo que falta en México. Justamente es eso. No, no se puede porque el árbol, la raíz del árbol de fruto rompe las chinampas porque crece así. Y estas raíces crecen derechas, son como postes para las chinampas y no dañan la tierra. Este cultivo es brócoli y este cultivo son acelgas. Y las acelgas se cortan y vuelven a crecer. Y aquí se está haciendo un cultivo de jitomate. Esta planta, esta es jitomate. Lo que pretendemos es que se agarre del árbol y empiece a soltar los jitomates. Esa es la idea del cultivo cerca del árbol. Además le da nutrientes y le da otras cosas importantes al árbol, ¿no? Este es el maíz. Déjenme buscar uno pequeño. Este maíz aquí se produce para alimentar a las vacas, pero también para vender en la población. Este es maíz criollo.
criollo.
Criollo, o sea, nativo. Si ustedes prueban la hoja, esta hoja es dulce. Le voy a hacer así para que ustedes lo...
Well, I just on that note, if you like the taste of corn a lot, but you don't really have any space to grow it, you can do corn sprouts, and it's actually really fun. All you need is seed corn, so corn that's not been cooked, just the raw kernels, and you plant it, and then you put like a paper towel, and you wet the paper towel and put it on top. There's plenty of guides online for you. But corn sprouts, like just the first shoots that come up from a corn plant, are very tender. It's not hard at all, but it tastes like corn. So you can get a little bit of taste of corn into things if you actually like that flavor. Yeah, just a fun little aside there. He's talking about something corn honey. Interesting. So maybe they're getting sugars actually from the corn stalks as well. That's cool.
corten. Esa es la miel de maíz. De ahí sale la miel del maíz. Es el tallo. Se extrae el jugo y sale la miel de maíz.
That's cool. I had no idea.
Se corta, se hace una selección de producto, se corta el maíz, se deja secar el grano un año y se vuelve a plantar. Se plantan las mejores. Entonces es una selección natural, digámoslo así, ¿no? Entonces, si usted quiere plantar lo que sea y quiere tener los mejores árboles, selecciona las mejores semillas y a partir de ahí salen los mejores árboles.
¿Hay un lugar aquí que puedes comprar semillas de,
Sí,
de aquí?
hay casas de semillas, sí. Tenemos bancos de semillas también, los creamos nosotros. Dejamos, por ejemplo, sembramos brócoli y dejamos que el brócoli alguna parte crezca, saque flor, saca semilla y esa la volvemos a reutilizar. Entonces vamos haciendo nuestra selección de productos, ¿no? Pero todos son nativos. Alguna ocasión alguien me trajo unas semillas de Alemania para unas lechugas de invierno y esas lechugas se hizo un cultivo experimental y resistieron el invierno y muy ricas. Entonces dejamos que crecieran y sacamos sus semillas y ahora ya las hicimos nativas. Entonces esas se van a sembrar en invierno, porque en invierno aquí no podemos producir tanta lechuga porque se quema con el frío, ¿no? Pero esa lechuga sí resistió. Entonces ya tenemos un producto que resiste el frío y que podemos comercializar aquí y que crece, ¿no? Ya se probó. Entonces esa es la diferencia. Déjenme buscarles un maíz pequeño para que lo prueben el maíz. Ese está mediano. Hay más chiquito. No, pero quiero que lo pruebe fresco.
¿Y puedes comer todo o solo...?
Todo.
Todo.
Pruébenlo, váyanlo mordiendo.
Oh my God.
Es dulce.
Muy dulce.
Eso se lo dan a los niños que crecen aquí. ¿Sabían que se come así?
Sí. Nunca sabía que
No.
podías hacer eso. ¿Es con todo maíz o
Con
solo-
todo.
Con todo maíz puedes hacer eso.
Sí. Se puede hacer eso.
Loco, ¿no? Sí.
Hasta las hojas, porque las hojas son dulces. Se come todo, se aprovecha todo. Eso es muy nutritivo. Muy nutritivo en ayunas, es buenísimo. Y también comer los tomates verdes crudos, así como manzanas, también se comen. Es como si el comerse un tomate verde crudo es como si se comiera una manzana verde de Smith, Apple Smith, una de esas. Es lo mismo con un tomate. Y eso me lo dijo un chef vegano que vino y venimos muy temprano y se puso a cosechar y se puso a comer todo lo que se cosechó. Y me dijo, esto es lo mejor del mundo. Estas son las maravillas. Este terreno yo creo que tiene 4,000 metros cuadrados, más o menos. Por eso los aztecas se convirtieron en los primeros, yo digo que son los primeros marqueteros del mundo, porque ellos descubrieron a los toltecas, los conquistaron, aprendieron el sistema de milpa y lo extendieron por todo el país, ¿no? O sea,
That's quite interesting as well. So what he was saying was that these Chinampas, this technology, didn't even come from the Aztecs themselves. It came from a conquered culture, the Toltecs, and they took what they learned from them and applied it to their own agriculture, and were able to grow so much food that they had the first marketplaces in the Americas. That's pretty incredible. That just shows the power of doing things this way.
Fue increíble lo que ellos hicieron. Y todo venía de aquí. Y eso gracias al suelo negro.
I did pause the video for a second there, Natalie. I'm not sure if that was what you were experiencing. But yeah, sometimes with Restream, because it's a browser-based streaming service, it can have some lag. So I apologize for that. But hopefully the words and the sounds are at least keeping up so you can follow along.
Usamos técnicas naturales para controlar las plagas, ¿no? Pero hay que conocerla. Por ejemplo, la mariposa blanca le gusta mucho el brócoli. Si ustedes ven el brócoli, empiezan a ver maripositas blancas. Cuando el brócoli crece, tiene más mariposas blancas. Pero lo que hacemos es que la mariposa pone sus huevos atrás de la hoja del brócoli. Cortamos el brócoli antes de que nazca la oruga. O cortamos las hojas que están invadidas por orugas para que no se metan al brócoli. La otra es que se puede sembrar con otra planta y ya no se acercan las plagas al brócoli. Atacan la primera, pero ya no la segunda planta, ¿no? Las milpas en tiempos aztecas estaban conformadas principalmente de 4 productos: maíz, frijol, calabaza y chile. El maíz se sembraba junto con el frijol porque compartían los nitrógenos.
So here we go. Here's the 3 sisters that I was talking about earlier. He's going to go through and describe how they all interacted with one another. And Natalie, are the captions somehow still in Spanish for you? Because it really just should be the captions from the video. Just, go ahead and remove any sort of other captions, because it should be showing up with the video itself.
Y además el frijol se agarra del maíz para crecer, ¿no? Entonces saca las vainas por arriba. La calabaza se siembra abajo porque es una rastrera. Las hojas son grandes y cuando crecen cubren el suelo, entonces eso mantiene la humedad para los 3 productos: frijol, maíz, calabaza, ¿no?
En inglés los dicen
Las 3 hermanas,
sí.
exactamente. Pero además en México se agrega el chile. El chile se ponía alrededor porque las plagas atacan al chile y no al maíz, ni al frijol, ni a la calabaza. Entonces era un sistema muy inteligente de sembrar, ¿no? El chile es un producto que lo ataca la plaga, la hoja, no al producto, la hoja. Porque sucede que al reverso de muchas cosas, por ejemplo, si uno tiene chile, cree que la hoja del chile va a picar. Y no pica. Lo que pica es el fruto. Entonces la plaga no se come el fruto, se come la hoja, ¿no? Pero hay veces hay cosas que son dulces y que la planta es picosa o tiene muy mal sabor. Y es así, diferente, ¿no? La tuna, por ejemplo, es una fruta que es muy difícil de cosechar porque tiene muchas espinas. Sí. Pero una vez que se come es muy dulce, ¿no? Y así es, o sea, es como la protección de la naturaleza hacia su especie. Eso es lo que pasa. ¿Qué les parece? Increíble, ¿no?
Sí, es
Sí, es curioso. Hasta la misma gente de aquí. Mi trabajo también es crear conciencia en ellos. Por ejemplo, hace un mes firmé un contrato de renta de una chinampa que estoy restaurando. Y estaba llena de pasto. Y estaba buscando productores: oye, necesito que me ayudes en la chinampa, que no sé qué. Me decían, bueno, pues vamos a ponerle un químico para que el pasto se muera y ya puedas empezar a sembrar. Le dije, no, Yo necesito que el pasto se corte y luego se levante y luego quitemos la raíz sin poner nada de químicos. No, es que eso es mucho trabajo y te vas a tardar un montón. No me importa, ¿no? Entonces ahorita estamos en el proceso de limpieza, de dejarla como jardín, ¿no? Ya que esté como jardín, entonces ya con herramientas vamos a ir quitando el pasto, pero no vamos a usar nada de químicos, ¿no? Pero es eso, o sea, la gente lo quiere así, y hasta los mismos productores, ¿no? A los de aquí les digo, ¿por qué no siembran zanahorias o betabelés? Me dicen, no, es un cultivo de 4 meses y a nosotros no nos conviene. Nosotros necesitamos darle rotación. Dije, pero no importa, tienes un terreno enorme, los dejas ahí crecer y ya después te los llevas. Me dice, no, prefiero aprovechar toda la tierra. Es una ideología muy rara, muy urbana, no sé cómo decirlo, ¿no? No, al final de cuentas no es bueno. El gobierno otorga permisos a los productores para tener motor en una lancha. No hay un límite porque todavía no está 100% regulado lo que es la parte ecológica. Pero pues evidentemente tratamos de ser más conscientes y no usar motores, ¿no? A menos que sean eléctricos y no a gasolina. Esa es la diferencia.
¿Cuántas chinampas estás restaurando ahora?
Voy por la cuarta. Voy por la cuarta.
¿Y arroz?
Arroz no. Es mucha agua para el arroz. Las chinampas sí, se ven así café, porque se quema por el frío, pero el agua se mantiene. No, nunca, el nivel nunca baja. Y si hay mucha lluvia, nunca se inunda. No, porque el gobierno de la ciudad tiene bombas para extraer y poner agua. Entonces crea un equilibrio todo el tiempo. Además, acuérdense que el 10% del agua pluvial, del agua de lluvia, la absorben las chinampas. Entonces no se inundan. Ustedes le dicen egrets.
Parecía como un egret, pero no
Sí.
sabía eso.
Son egrets.
So in this, we can see more of that edge effect. We now not only have agricultural space and space to move about with boats, but we have habitat for the what he calls the white heron or the egret, and lots more than they otherwise would have if it was all open water. So that's the power of maximizing that edge and really valuing spaces that otherwise would be seen as marginal. Like the middle of a lake would usually be seen as marginal land for growing food. But if you do it this way, where you're creating canals, you can have both lake and lake life as well as terrestrial life. He was talking a little bit earlier about wanting to get rid of all the grass. And it's possible that there might be a different way of doing that. Instead of just eradicating all the grass, maybe you could find a use for it. Maybe you could just do what's known as chop and drop, where you chop down the material and you make sure that it's, if it has a root that you can pull out, you pull out the root and break that. You chop it up and you just leave it on the ground. That acts as a compost as well as a mulch to keep other weeds out and stuff like that. So there may be other ways to do this. Just because he's doing it this way doesn't mean that it's the only way to do a Chinampas. As well as he's doing many different crops on his 4,000 square meters that he says he owns. But the way that he's doing it, you could even do it differently, where it's not just huge swaths of lettuce next to a huge stand of corn. Stuff like that. You could do more like the Three Sisters that he was talking about. It didn't look like he was doing that at the time, but you certainly could. So yeah, if you really wanted to try this technique, I would encourage you to try to integrate rather than segregate, right? So we're putting together plants that help each other out, and that also guards against the march of pests, who otherwise, you get a corn pest in that corn crop, and that's probably going to multiply enough to take out all of that corn. Same thing with the lettuce, what have you. But if you put things into patches and you spread them out a little bit more, that's a way to guard against pests completely overwhelming and destroying your crops. It takes a lot more manual labor because now you're not doing things in nice, neat rows. So you're not doing things necessarily as efficiently in terms of being able to do mechanical production. The planting, the tilling, the harvesting, and separating, and all that sort of thing. But you're building a lot more resilience into the system. So it's interesting to see the way he does that, but just know it's not necessarily the only way to do it. So John says, I'm sensing this would work for a commune or a community too in the running of it. Absolutely. Yeah, I think this would lend itself very nicely to a commune, especially if you're not as concerned with market crops and you're more concerned with subsistence. That would give you a much better opportunity to see what these Chinampas can really do. You can maybe get away from growing things under plastic, growing things in rows, and do things a little bit more. I don't want to say naturally, but just in a way that's more conducive to forming it, knitting it into an ecosystem that's all interconnected and balancing each other out. And Natalie says tall grasses are good for wildlife, insects, camouflage, etc. Yeah, there may be some insects that could be beneficial that would make their habitat, make their home in those tall grasses. So there may be a reason that he's taking it out, but there could be a reason also to keep it. So just always keep in mind that in general, more biodiversity is better for your ecology. And in general, it's easier to incorporate what you don't want into things like mulch and feed for other things than it is to just mechanically eradicate it or even, chemically eradicate it. And I say easier in the long term. You're going to do less work in the long term doing it that way. So yeah, but it's been interesting to see the way that he has utilized these Chinampas.
La tilapia prácticamente ha arrasado o matado a muchas especies endémicas como el ajolote.
Sorry, I just want to pause that for one second. So, John, you have a thicket that you use to shield the deer from the neighbors. I assume because your neighbors are avid deer hunters. That's kind of funny. But yeah, there's definitely many uses that you can get out of a single stand of plants. But yeah, he's going to talk about some of the invasive species like the tilapia. There's probably a lot of other fish that would have been used in the lake prior to introduction of the tilapia, but they can be an aggressive fish. They're a type of, what is that type of fish? I can't remember the name, but they're a more aggressive fish. They may eat other things, and it looks like they are attacking the axolotl. I don't actually know how to pronounce that, so forgive me if that's wrong, but axolotl is what it looks like to me. But basically it's a little amphibian. You got a lot of hunters around there too. And and sometimes hunters could be a good thing. They if you're in an area where the natural predators, the apex predators, maybe they wolves or bears or mountain lions or whatever, have been displaced or hunted out of existence, it may be that the best way to manage it, the remaining herbivorous population, is to employ some hunters once in a while to thin the herd, while at the same time providing a little bit of food to the local community. Usually better, though, to reintroduce predators. We're going to watch a video on a future show on the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone and how that made the park come back to life in many ways. But yeah, if that's not a possibility in your local area, it could be that hunters are the most humane way of doing things as well. Because what an herbivorous population will do, if there is no predator pressure, is they may tend to overfeed to the point where their population gets out of control, they get beyond their carrying capacity, and then there's a mass starvation event, which would be a tragic thing to happen. So it all depends on how you look at it and what you think is the most humane way to manage things. But in general, as I say, just having the nature do the work for you is really the best way to do it. In terms of both efficiency, you have to do the least amount of work yourself, and in terms of just long-term ecological health.
¿Escuchado hablar del ajolote?
He escuchado algo.
Ajá. El ajolote es un anfibio endémico.
Ajolote.
Crece
Okay.
en los canales de Xochimilco. El ajolote es un anfibio que solo hay en México, ya en Xochimilco. Ahora está en peligro de extinción. Y que existía en los canales, y lo que hacía es que limpiaba los canales porque se comía todos los parásitos que están en el agua. Ahora ya no hay. La estadística nos dice que se encontraban cada kilómetro de 20 a 40 organismos en el agua. Ahora es al revés. Cada 20, 30 kilómetros se encuentra 1 o 2 organismos en el agua. Y eso es porque la tilapia se lo ha comido. Y también los chinamperos se lo comían, ¿no? Ese animal produce una enzima que es capaz de regenerar el cuerpo. Es decir, si yo le corto un dedo, una mano, un brazo, partes del corazón, del cerebro, pedazos de piel, en 3 meses lo vuelve a regenerar por completo.
Wow.
Hay una iniciativa que se llama Iniciativa Darwin, que está en Inglaterra, que ellos están estudiando la enzima del ajolote para inyectarla a veteranos de guerra que han perdido partes de su cuerpo, y está dando resultados. Entonces se está reproduciendo con fines de extraer la enzima, ¿no? O de reproducirla, y además aquí se reproduce para ver si podemos regresar a los ajolotes a su estado natural. Pero hay que quitar la tilapia primero. Esto que ven aquí es una laguna, se llama la laguna de Tlilac. Este cuerpo de agua, aquí cada año se hace el evento de la Llorona en la noche. En esta chinampa se monta un...
I just want to look up something quick about the tilapia. Cichlids. That's the species of fish there. They're a cichlid. If you've ever been to an aquatic pet store, like a fish store or whatever, for home use, home fish, or whatever you want to call it, cichlids are always in the aggressive category. So they like to eat a lot of other things, like basically anything they can get a hold of, they will eat. So this is having devastating effects on these. I'm trying to get the pronunciation right, but alajote, something like that. These amphibians that he was talking about. So tilapia are a commonly farmed fish because they grow really fast. They're easy to manage. A lot of them, in fact, are what's known as mouth brooders. So the parent, and I'm not sure if it's the male or the female, but I think it's probably the female, will have, put out their eggs, and once the eggs hatch, they will all congregate in the parent's mouth. And so they can, spit them out one by one and let them explore and eat and all that stuff. But if there's danger, suck them out really quickly. So it's, it reproduces really well and really fast, and the fish itself grows fast. You can get, a pound to a pound and a half of usable meat in just one season, basically. So it's very fast growing fish, which is why it's used in aquaculture so often. But here we're seeing a downside of just introducing a species because people like it and it's commercially a viable species to harvest. So, as I keep trying to reiterate, we always have to be careful what we're doing when we put tilapia or any sort of commercially raised animal into a new ecosystem. We have to realize that it could do damage like it is doing right now in the lake. Tilapia and man must have taken over. Yeah. So the little cute guys, what I'm calling them, I can't pronounce the name. I think he said alahuatl. I really like the Aztec language. It sounds very beautiful, but I'm not really good at pronouncing the words well. So I apologize to anyone who knows the correct pronunciation.
Una pirámide de madera y se cuenta la historia de la conquista en la noche. Es un show, es como un show de teatro, ¿no? Entonces ustedes vienen en la noche, compran sus boletos, los van subiendo al bote y los traen aquí. Y todas las trajineras se estacionan aquí y el show es con luces en la noche.
Oh, wow.
Esta que ustedes ven aquí es una típica chinampa, porque está rodeada de canal, está en medio del canal, tiene estacas alrededor y tiene árboles agüejotes alrededor. Y así era el principio de las chinampas. Se producía en la parte de arriba y se cosechaba.
¿Puedes nadar en el agua o hay demasiados parasites que...?
Yo creo que para nosotros sí,
Sí.
nos picaría la piel. Para los que viven aquí no.
Okay.
Porque en Sábado de Gloria los chicos nadan en el agua. Pero los que viven aquí.
Sí.
Aunque tuve una clienta de Michigan que vino y se echó al agua.
Oh, no.
Traía su traje de baño y todo y se aventó al agua. Dijo, voy a nadar aquí.
¿Cuántos años estos árboles
Ajá.
crecen rápido o
No.
poco?
Se tardan cerca de 3 años
Wow, that's pretty fast.
en crecer así. Y entre más viejos, el tronco es más ancho.
Okay.
Estos son árboles jóvenes, pero por ejemplo estos son más viejos que tienen el tronco más ancho. De hecho, en el barrio de San Juan, que está en el centro de Xochimilco, allí está un árbol, un ahuehuete, que es un árbol ancho, como el de Oaxaca. No sé si han escuchado hablar, el árbol de la noche triste.
Okay.
Es un árbol inmenso, que ese árbol lo plantó Cuauhtémoc cuando vino aquí a pedirle ayuda al rey Moctezuma para la conquista.
Tal vez está.
Está ese árbol vivo. Tiene unos cinturones de acero porque ya de tan grande se ha desgajado y lo han vuelto a unir y sigue vivo. Tiene más de 500 años ese árbol y sigue vivo.
¿Y dónde está?
Está en el centro de Xochimilco, barrio de San Juan. La diferencia es que de aquí para allá es terreno federal, es del gobierno federal. El federal es el que gobierna todo el país. El local es el que gobierna solo Xochimilco. Y aquí es la diferencia. Por eso es muy importante la diferencia. Ustedes ven de este lado chinampas con estacas, ¿no? Y de este lado no. De este lado los árboles se ven más derechos que de este lado. De este lado los árboles se ven inclinados. Eso pasa porque la tilapia se come el lodo, se come las chinampas. Lo que hace es que abre cuevas para mantener a sus bebés a salvo. Entonces, la degradación del lodo hace que el árbol se caiga. Por eso hay que estacar, porque se pone un costal de protección y luego se pone una malla y luego se ponen estacas. Y así la tilapia ya no rompe las orillas. Si ven al frente hay un árbol caído allá. Y eso pasa por el debilitamiento de la tierra, porque las tilapias rompen las chinampas. Pero el problema es que esto es gobierno federal.
So here we have another problem that the tilapia are creating. He was saying they were digging into the mud banks underneath the water line so that they could have a protected, sheltered place for their offspring. But the consequence of that is they're undermining the root structures of the trees on the banks, and they're starting to fall over, which is why they have to stake up the sides of the chinampas. So yeah, just for having a commercially viable product in the tilapia, you're doing untold damage to the natural ecosystems as well as the agricultural ones that this guy's trying to rejuvenate, the chinampas. It's sad, but it's yet another example of why you need to really be careful when you introduce stuff. You have to know their habits and how that can affect the land, especially if they get free of your confines. Because, this may not be, it may not be that they threw them into the canals or they're trying to grow them in these canals. It may be that they escaped from a other contained fish farm. It could be. Maybe you could get control of the tilapia in a safe way. Yeah. And as usual, the permaculture response would be that at least a good starting point would be that the problem is the solution. So maybe you don't have a tilapia problem in your canals. Maybe you have a lack of some sort of predator for the tilapia. And maybe there's a local predator that would just love to eat up some tilapia. Maybe those herons that he looked at earlier. Or perhaps something different. Maybe there's a different way to trap them, and then you could just use them as a food source as usual, but at the same time take them out of a system that they are damaging. Or maybe you just have to get to the point where you go on expeditions and try and find all of their little burrows in the land and root them out as best you can. I mean, that's kind of the strategy they use in the Caribbean. I think it's the Caribbean especially, but even places like on the Gulf Coast, like Florida and Alabama and stuff, where lionfish have been introduced from people's aquarium. You've probably seen them. They have those stripes, and they have all these they look like quills basically sticking out from them. Very poisonous. You don't want to touch them, but they're wreaking havoc on the local ecosystem. And so it's to the point where divers just go out and it's sad. They just spear and kill as many lionfish as they can find. Well, that's probably not the best way to manage it, though. It would be better if you can find some sort of a natural mechanism to keep things in control, because nature's always working and you are not. Nature's always providing services, even while you're sleeping and when you're not working. It still rains, the wind still blows, predators still do their thing. So if you can find a natural way to manage things, it usually is better, a more long-term solution. And if you take a very long view of these things too, eventually, virtually every species, whether it's a very fast-growing tree, like say the buckthorn. We have terrible problems with buckthorn in the Midwest. These hardwood trees that really populate the edges of woodlands, and they grow up in shade. They create such a dense shade that it shades everything else out, all the native plants and stuff. Whether it's the tilapia and these channels, whatever it is, eventually it will be absorbed into the ecosystem. Something will find it tasty and start eating it, or some parasite or virus will find it a good host and it will keep its population in check. That's how things work. Otherwise, every time you introduced invasive species, it would just spell the end for an ecosystem, and that's not how things function. They're dynamic equilibriums, and once you break a part of that, eventually it will mend itself, unless you're totally destroying everything, just leaving nothing inhabitable. That's the only way to really entirely break an ecosystem. But over a very long time frame, and in the process, you may lose those cute little amphibians. And that may have ripple effects in other parts of your ecosystem. But eventually the system will heal itself. That's not to say we should just be, laissez-faire about it or flippant and say, oh, whatever happens, happens. Let's just let nature take its course. We can certainly do our part to undo the damage that we have knowingly or unknowingly caused. But just understand that, it's not as though all is lost. There's always hope that invasives will be integrated. I know in Minnesota, we still have a problem with this thing called Eurasian milfoil. It's this plant that grows really fast in lakes. Eventually it will infill the entire lake, and basically you got a mud puddle rather than a lake. Recently, there's been some sort of bug that has developed a taste for it. And this can happen. These things can evolve as well. Bugs that may be a niche feeder on some other plant will develop a taste. Maybe it's an evolutionary trait that it's adapting to the changing environment. Maybe it just hadn't tried it before, and it for whatever reason decides that it's tasty. But they found there's actually bugs that will eat this Eurasian milfoil. So there's hope that eventually it will be kept in check by the natural dynamic equilibrium of the local ecosystems. So yeah, just a little bit of perspective on all this, because it shouldn't all just be doom and gloom every time there's an invasive species. Otherwise, it's just not realistic in the first place. It's not how nature works. Nature will eventually adapt and overcome.
Y esto es propiedad privada, ¿no? Esa es la diferencia. Pues, por ejemplo, es gobierno federal porque si ustedes ven está la luz, ¿no? Solo pasan las torres de luz, pero nada más. Ajá. ¿Cómo corre la electricidad?
¿Los estraques son de este árbol
No, pino.
o pino?
Ujú. El pino es una madera que resiste el agua. Eso que ven ahí se llama apantle. Apantle. El apantle es un pequeño canal que se construye al lado de una chinampa para irrigarlo, para regar los cultivos. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Que si yo tengo una chinampa y hago un hoyo en medio, a los 4 días voy a tener agua. Y eso pasa porque las chinampas absorben agua. Entonces se llena de agua. Pero esa agua que llega es agua limpia, es agua filtrada por lodo. Entonces la puedo usar para regar mis cultivos. Es una técnica muy prehispánica, pero muy eficiente al día de hoy.
So he's talking about the way these are constructed with layers of mud and reeds and just layered on top of each other one after another. It functions as a big sponge that not only draws water in but filters it at the same time, so you don't have to worry as much about perhaps chemicals that are bothering the canals that you're running through. but that all happens just naturally. So you're severely reducing your need for irrigation because there's always water being drawn in from the canals themselves. And he talked about how well that he was saying earlier, how well they absorb rainwater, that you never even see a change in the level of water. And he said that's also due to the way they manage the local dam system to release water when things are getting flooded in other places. But also it's because they're just naturally really good at absorbing things, absorbing water. So it's one less thing you have to worry about. And irrigation can be a huge thing that farmers worry about. Costs tons of money. It could be the main cost for your endeavor, depending on what you're doing and where you're at.
Y si observan, se ve cristalina el agua. Esto se llama apantle. Bueno, yo estudié banca y finanzas y me metí a trabajar al banco. Trabajé en banco 8 años. Yo siempre he querido, mi pasión era la biología marina, pero mi mamá no me dejó. Mi mamá me dijo, no, te vas a morir de hambre, tienes que estudiar otra cosa. Y bueno, los números no me desagradan, me gustan las finanzas, pero no es mi pasión, ¿no? Cuando yo salí del banco puse una tienda de mascotas. Entonces yo vendía peces, peceras, acuarios, sistemas de recirculación de agua. Vendía todo tipo de animales, exóticos, no exóticos. Reproducía hámsters, los vendía en los mercados, ¿no? Por ejemplo. Pero también vendía alimento para animales. Buscando clientes, me hice de 2 clientes muy importantes que fue las universidades, la UAM y la UNAM. Y a ellos les vendía equipos para laboratorios. Pero como estas 2 universidades reproducen el ajolote, yo les vendía alimento para ajolote a ellos. Entonces ellos, los profesores, me empezaron a vincular en Xochimilco por el ajolote. Me dijeron, oye, a lo mejor puedes encontrar clientes en Xochimilco porque hay productores que necesitan alimento, etc. Total, en una conferencia de Conavio que nos invitaron para discutir sobre si se regresaba o no el ajolote a los canales. Ahí yo me hice de varios clientes y me hice de un amigo en particular que es reportero de Perú. Él vivía en Perú, vino a vivir a México y con él empezamos la investigación de las chinampas. Entonces él hizo una investigación aquí y empezó a ver que había cultivos. Como sabía que yo soy emprendedor nato, me dijo, oye, hay que hacer un negocio con los productos de las chinampas. Y se nos ocurrió la idea de empezar a vender canastas de lechugas con nuestros amigos, ¿no? Resulta que de los amigos de los amigos de los amigos le llegó el producto a una restaurantera y ella nos dijo que quería productos de las chinampas en su restaurante. Y ahí empezó la venta con restaurantes. Pero seguíamos vendiendo vía correo electrónico, mandando un Excel para que nos dieran sus pedidos. Y creció tanto el proyecto que llegamos a tener 20 restaurantes trabajando con ellos. Y solo nos dedicábamos a entregar y entregar y entregar y entregar producto por todos lados. Yo recuerdo que iba en mi carro manejando, entregando bolsitas de lechugas por todos lados, ¿no? No sé si se acuerdan, sí, no sé si se acuerdan de la contingencia que hubo en México de la H1N1, que no se podía salir en México. Pues yo era el único repartiendo verduras por todos lados, ¿no? Muy chistoso. Y después, mi amigo, al mes de que empezamos el proyecto, me dije, ¿sabes qué? Me voy a vivir a Canadá. Te dejo todo y tú te encargas, ¿no? Se fue a vivir a Canadá y entonces yo ya empecé los procesos de venta de los productos. Me rebasaron, evidentemente. Colapsé un momento. Y entonces ahí fue donde yo creé una página web, donde la gente ahora ve la página, se inscribe, hace su pedido, lo paga y se lo llevamos a su casa, ¿no? Seguimos trabajando en aquel tiempo con varios restaurantes, hasta que empezamos a trabajar con los mejores, como Pujol, de Enrique Olvera, Quintonil, Máximo Bistrot. Todos ellos compraban productos de las Chinampas. Ahora todos ellos tienen Chinampas aquí, ¿no? Entonces yo nada más me dedico a entregar a las amas de casa que me hacen pedidos por WhatsApp, y un día a la semana, ¿no? Entonces un día a la semana levanto los pedidos y los llevo a un sitio donde las mamás llegan y los recogen. Y así fue como llegué aquí. Ahora tengo 10 años acá, ya con todo un proyecto mucho más desarrollado, pero ya probado, ¿no? Que sí funciona.
Bien.
Sí, funciona bien. Sí, exactamente. He visto apiarios aquí que producen miel, pero muy pocos, muy pocos. Necesitamos que las abejas regresen. Pero eso pasó porque esta zona tiene pocas plantas, flores.
Oh, sí.
Necesitamos producir más flores para que regresen aquí. Ha sucedido algo muy trágico, digamos, en Xochimilco. Xochimilco ahora está dividido como en 3 partes, ¿no? Este es el ecológico, es lo más vivo que tenemos, ¿no? Hay otra parte que se llama San Gregorio. Toda esa parte era de producción agrícola, bueno, es de producción agrícola de flores. Ahí se produce la mayor cantidad de flores de Xochimilco. El problema que ahora tiene es que fue afectado por el sismo del año pasado, y además tiene problemas de uso de pesticidas, porque como venden las flores en los mercados, no dejan que los animales se maten los pétalos. Entonces ya no los vendes si está lastimado, ¿no? Entonces se usa mucho pesticida. Y la tercera parte es la parte turística, que es la parte de nativitas, donde se venden muchas, más bien hay mucho turismo ahí. Entonces es un canal estrecho como este, yo creo, y van trajineras y vienen del mismo lado.
Sí.
Y hay mucha fiesta, mucho ruido,
Sí.
chicos tomando, etcétera. O sea, es como muy ruidoso. Y además hay casas a los lados. Entonces no es nada ecológico, solo turístico. Esto es, por eso les digo, esto es lo último que queda como tiempos prehispánicos. Porque hay 17 embarcaderos alrededor de Xochimilco, pero sí son un problema serio algunos, porque solo se fomenta el turismo. Y esto que hacemos es turismo de conciencia. Ustedes se van a ir con otra idea de Xochimilco, de un Xochimilco que está vivo, que produce, que hay alimento, probaron la comida, vieron los cultivos, ¿no? Entonces es otra cosa. Pues esto es Xochimilco.
Yeah, it's a very, very different way of using the land. All right, and that's the end of the video. That was a bit of a slower one, so I do appreciate y'all hanging with me through that. I hope you get a good idea of what the Chinampas are about now. I think I'm going to pull up a few pictures, though, and we'll see if we can get more of an overview picture. Maybe it's what I should have started with. I didn't realize this video was going to be formatted particularly in this way. I hadn't seen it before. So let's take a look at some images. So here's some images of Chinampas and how they function. We'll start with this one here. Oh. So this is how they're constructed. So you have the woven reed wall and the mud and reed mat, and you just layer it one after another. And there's those willow trees, and you can see that they're still growing corn or maize in rows. So that may not be entirely accurate to the way they would have done things historically. They probably would have done more of a Three Sisters sort of situation with also the chiles. Yeah, basically you're just taking area that was just lake bottom, and you're turning it into arable land. And so the ones that he was looking at, the ones that he was using, are much wider than these ones, but they can be they're very narrow as well. There's nothing that says that they have to be, hundreds of square meters, or 100 meters wide by another 100 meters, or whatever it is. All sorts of ways you can do these sorts of things. In fact, next week we're going to be looking at a homestead, the Bullock brothers homestead. They're out on Orcas Island in Washington State, and I believe they rely pretty heavily on their version of Chinampas, which they basically just extended from their shoreline. So we're going to look at a little mini documentary on that next week, or probably next week. Next time we do permaculture, anyway. May or may not be next week. So we'll get to see more of it in action from people that are more looking at it through a permaculture lens. The Bullock brothers were featured pretty heavily in the really great book Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. And if you're interested in getting into permaculture and starting to think in the sort of systems that it relies on, that's a great book to check out. Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. So yeah, and Natalie says I kind of hate to see all that's been capitalized, though. Like John said earlier, it's an excellent idea for commune and communities, as long as it's not taken over in whole by capitalists. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for a commune or any sort of an intentional community to be successful, you really have to plan for the long term. We're not talking about making a short-term profit and then getting in, getting out, and extracting as much as you can when we're talking about intentional communities. So yeah, this sort of a technique, this sort of way of looking at agriculture is much more conducive to a commune where you're doing things with the intent of lasting generations on the same piece of land. Oh, so your glitches in your Wi-Fi were messing things up a little bit, Natalie. I'm sorry to hear that. You can always go back and watch the VOD on Twitch, and the recordings are always saved on the couple of different places that I stream to on Facebook. So those recordings should be more clear. And then also YouTube as well. Always save the live recordings there. And Twitter, more recently. I've added that to the places that I stream to. But yeah, it's a pretty cool system, and it really maximizes that edge. You get the aquatic opportunities right next to the terrestrial ones, and they kind of interact with one another in really positive ways. Ways that reinforce one another, ways that make things more ecologically diverse. But you also see some of the pitfalls. It really depends on what you're introducing as well to these sorts of systems. But as you saw, it was kind of hard to... It was perhaps easy to miss there at the end when he was showing that band of clear water that he had dug out in the middle of one of his Chinampas. And he's like, you dig down far enough and eventually it fills in with water. And it's very clear and pure because it's been filtered through all the mud and reeds and stuff. So if you were looking to reintroduce something like the oh boy, now I'm going to mess up the name again, but those little amphibians, those cute little amphibians, if you're looking for a safer place to reintroduce them, that might be a good option, because you're more or less guaranteed that, at least for now, there's no tilapia in that little canal that you've dug out in the middle of the large Chinampa. So it's a way that you can have a breeding area for them, that perhaps you can even have it connect to the other canals so that they can expand out as they do. That's not to say that it's entirely impervious to the tilapia. For one thing, they're burrowing into the sides of the mud on the Chinampa, so that could be that they could burrow in far enough. But also, fish tend to spread through things like they lay their eggs in the mud gets on a bird's foot, and it transports it to a new body of water, that sort of thing. So it's not impossible, it's not impervious, but it could be a sheltered area if you're looking to reintroduce some sort of wildlife that's been threatened. But that could be another place that you put wildlife that you don't want to have introduced to the canals. If you're trying to keep it in that area, that would be definitely a safer option. Again, not fail safe, but if there's something like perhaps a crayfish or something like that, and you didn't want it to get out into the wider waterways, you might do it in the middle of a large Chinampa and just make sure you had good controls so that it couldn't escape. But yeah, I enjoyed that documentary, even though it was a bit slower moving than we're used to. It gave you a lot of good visuals of what these Chinampas look like, and just kind of how serene the nature is around these areas. Like, I mean, you heard the whirring of boat engines sometimes, but mostly it was pretty, peaceful. Yeah, good idea for the cute little amphibians until the tilapia figure out how to get in. Or just, like I said, their eggs might get transported in by mistake through a bird or something like that. So yeah, again, not foolproof, but they're definitely strategies. And it sounds like he is trying to these amphibians so that they can make a comeback, or at least have fighting chance. So that's cool. That was cool to see. Yeah, it was definitely a beautiful and serene area. So yeah, that's one more tech that you would be starting to think about if you were to if you wanted to apply permaculture to your local area, whether it's in the communal raising of food, or it's more of a market-oriented endeavor for you. Whatever. This is one more technique that you can think about that may work better in your area than the local farming techniques. I'm glad you appreciate it, John. That's always my aim, to be educational about sustainability and permaculture in particular. Okay, there's one thing that I wanted to show you all before we get out of here for the night, and that is... why is that? Here we go. All right. So my Facebook group, Left Signal Boost. And if you're, if the word Facebook turns you off immediately, I totally understand. Although I'd like to think that we've cultivated a little bit of a brighter spot on Facebook than you normally see, a place to boost the signal of different leftist creators. That's our main function. And right now we are in the nomination process for our annual award show. And, it's not a real serious thing. We don't like to take ourselves too seriously. But at the same time, it's a way for the people to have a say in any sort of award show. Like, you don't usually see that sort of thing. We like to think of ourselves as the true people's choice. And anyways, it's called The Lefties, and we're in the nominating process right now. I'm glad you enjoyed that, Natalie. So if you go on over to Facebook, I'll put the link in the chat right now. So if you follow that link right there, and you go over and join the group if you haven't, and there's also some pages that you can look at it on as well. I'm glad you liked it, John. But anyway, if you have any sort of leftist creator that has done good work over the past year, basically since we did the award show last year, But all of 2021 is fair game as well. You can go and nominate them for an award. And then at the end of this month, at the beginning of November, we're going to open up the voting. And both nominations and voting are open up to anyone. As long as the person that is nominated is definitely doing leftist stuff explicitly. And as long as as long as you are nominating them for work that has taken place within the last year, basically since November 1st of last year, then they qualify, and you can nominate people for as many categories as you think they qualify for, and then we'll start opening up the voting in November, and on November 26th, the day after U.S. Thanksgiving. I'm just going to double check that date. I'm pretty sure it is, though. Yep. Friday, November 26th, we're going to have our award show right here on this channel. It's going to go out to all the same places as usual. And we'll have some fun with it. We're going to put together a little highlight reel, just a few second clip of everybody who's been nominated. So for every category, we're going to go through and highlight the work of all the people that have been nominated, just to give them a little moment in the sun. And then we'll announce the winners. And it's possible this year that even some of the winners could show up to receive their awards, because we were incredibly tiny last year, so no one even knew about us who was a leftist creator themselves. But yeah, this year things are different. We're actually getting some notice from some bigger creators, which is really cool to see. But anyway, yeah, if you're into leftist creators, doesn't matter what the medium is. We have categories for YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Reddit, as well as things like visual arts, as well as performing arts, all sorts of things. There's tons and tons of categories, as you can see. I'll scroll through and list off some of the categories here. So there's for YouTube, there's a bunch of stuff. There's best new leftist YouTube channel, best leftist YouTube video essay channel, best leftist video essay, and so on and so forth. Debate channels, all sorts of things. There's categories for Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, podcasting, TikTok, Instagram, music, visual arts, movies, journalism, literature, Reddit, blogs, databases, organizations, worker-owned cooperatives, and we'll have an in memoriam category for the first time this year as well. So it'll be a lot of fun. You'll get to see a bunch of different leftist creators and their work that you may not otherwise be exposed to. And it's just a way for people to have a say and give thanks to the people that have inspired them over the course of the year. So I really encourage you to do that. You can go to Left Signal Boost. You can go to Left Pod Posting, another group, or the group for We Are Many education and discussion group, which will be helping us present during the award night. And if you're really averse to joining any sort of Facebook group, you can always go to my personal page, Bread Theory, as well as Left Pod Radio or Left Signal Boost TV, and you can put in your nominations there as well. So I really encourage you all to do that. It only gets to be a better award show the more that people nominate really great creators. And it's just a lot of fun. All right. And the other thing that I wanted to show you was the Discord server. I don't think I'm going to be able to bring it up. But I do have a new Discord. So that's one more place where you can interact with other people and talk about the shows that I put on here at Bread Theory. And as well as there's sections to now promote yourself. And eventually we'll have up the talk channels in case any of you viewers want to come on and share your opinion live. So there's that as well. So yeah, the new Discord, there's the link right there. I will also link it to you. 1 second. I'll copy that link for you. Oh, that's right. I put in a new command. So let's see if this works. I put in a new command for Nightbot, so it should work. If you just do Discord, so exclamation Discord, that should work. Let's see if it worked. I think I may have to do it in... Didn't end up working. That's unfortunate. Oh, it was not a capital. I did that wrong. Let's try that once again. Discord with a lowercase d. There we go. So there's the link to the Discord there. That's the invite, so you can join in. And that's a way that you can share links that you want me to look at, because I don't allow them in the Twitch chat directly. And that's just another way to interact and talk about the things even when I'm not streaming. So you guys can keep sharing your ideas and making your comments and all that sort of cool stuff. But I really appreciate you guys all sticking with me tonight. And for those of you on Twitch, we're going to go ahead and raid into another streamer. And if you have any suggestions, now's the time to throw them out there. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick someone. And for everyone else, yeah, have a great night. And I hope to see you. I'm actually not going to be doing Wednesday this week. I'm going to be doing tomorrow. So I'll be doing Monday. Probably at around 7 p.m. Central Standard Time in the U.S. Going to be doing a different book as well. So we're going to take a break this week from State and Revolution. I know we only got one chapter left, but instead we're going to switch over, and I'm going to be on the For We Are Many podcast, and we're going to be covering a chapter in Emma Goldman's Anarchism and Other Essays. So that should be fun. That'll be broadcast in all the same places that you're seeing it tonight, as well as on their various channels as well. So yeah, check out For We Are Many. You can search them out on Facebook as well. Really great group of people, and they do a lot of amazing streams. I don't even know how they keep up with their streaming schedule, because they all have full-time jobs as well. It's more than I could do. I'll just put it that way. So I'm really impressed with the work that they do. Very cool people as well. Let's see who is streaming right now and who we're going to do a raid into. Oh, Real Radham is streaming. So I really like this new channel that I've found. He has a very... I got to mute it for myself so I'm not talking over it. He has a very dry sense of humor, which I really appreciate. And right now he's both listening, it sounds like, to a debate with a friend of the show, Dan Platt. That's really cool. That's a nice bit of serendipity there. So it looks like it's a debate with him and a bunch of other people. I'm not sure what the topic is, but he is at the same time carving a miniature figure. So that sounds like a lot of fun. He's really intelligent, and so go check him out as well. In fact, let's shout him out before we do that. So before we raid in, we'll go ahead and shout out Real Radham. Go check out this streamer. Very cool. And that's the person we'll be raiding into for those of you on Twitch. All right, Lectem friends, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow night in the same place we got together tonight.